Phillipsburg Land Use Board Meeting, January 6, 2022. Note that there are some segments of the video that have been deleted due to inappropriate content due to a Zoom bomber.
Calling this meeting to order. Adequate notice of a regular public meeting has been provided in accordance with the Open Public Meeting Act by posting the notice on the bulletin board in the municipal building, by publishing it in the Express Times and the Star Ledger, the official newspapers of the town of Phillipsburg, by posting the notice on the website of the town of Phillipsburg, filing said notice with the town clerk of Phillipsburg, as well as furnishing said notice to those persons requesting it pursuant to the Open Public Meeting Act. As advertised, action may be taken at this meeting. Okay, it is the board's policy of the town of Phillipsburg Land Use Board not to hear any new cases after 10 p.m. and no new witnesses after 10:30. Mr. Mayor, do you have the flag?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay. Kelly, who needs to be sworn in?
There's nobody. Everybody are members. No new members.
No new members? Okay. Would you please take attendance then?
Sure. Mr. Benjavanga.
Here.
Mr. Brodsman. Mr. Brodsman emailed me. I don't think he's going to be here.
Okay.
Okay. I will let you know then, Mr. Duffy. I'll email you. I'll text you and let you know. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Duffy.
Here.
Mr. Hanasak.
Here.
Mr. Penrose.
Here.
Mayor Tersigny.
Here.
Mr. Turnbull.
Here.
Mr. Swicker.
Here.
Mr. Austin.
Here.
And Mr. Rooney. He's waving.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 9 members here. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Wilhelm at this point for nominations for chairman.
Good evening. At this time, it would be appropriate for any of the members to nominate somebody to be chairperson for 2022. So I'm soliciting nominations.
Nominate.
I'd like to nominate Bill Duffy for chairman.
I stated it first. Keith could second that.
Okay. Not a problem, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Is there any discussion now that the nomination has been seconded? Hearing no
Hold on, Scott. Okay, we found the problem.
Hearing no discussion, Ms. Leffler, can you take a roll call?
Or Mr. Brodsman, he is not here.
You're here? What's this? Oh, you're recording. Okay, I see.
Who's
It's the only name I.
then now? Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavanga,
Yes.
Mayor Tersigny,
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
Mr. Rooney.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
The
you.
floor is
Thank you.
yours.
Thank you, members of the board. I appreciate your confidence. I would now accept nominations for vice chair.
I'll nominate Keith Swicker.
John Penrose.
And who was that?
John Penrose.
Okay, thanks, John.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Who's that?
John Turnbull.
John Turnbull. Okay, thank you. Are there any additional nominations? Not hearing any additional nominations. Kelly, would you please take roll call?
Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavenga,
Yes.
Mayor Trussigny,
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
Mr. Rooney.
How did you do?
I tried both links. The first link's invalid. First link. I can't show you. I have to
All
bend
right,
down.
hold on.
Don't give me that.
Can you please put your phone on mute? We have a Pixel XL.
Okay. Keith, congratulations.
Thank you.
About that.
Okay. Do I hear a nomination for board secretary? Is that a nomination? Is that an appointment?
The board needs a secretary, so it would be helpful if somebody nominated.
Nominate Kelly Leffler.
I'll second that.
Any other nominations? Any discussion? Kelly, if you would take roll call?
Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavenga,
Yes.
Mayor Trussigny,
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
and Mr. Rooney.
Congratulations, Kelly.
Thank you.
I need a motion for appointment of a recording secretary.
Make a
Nominate
motion for
Kelly-
John Penrose.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think recording secretary is also Kelly.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure.
Nominate Kelly Leffler.
Thanks.
Got a nomination for Kelly Leffler. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, John Penrose,
And who was the first?
the mayor.
Mayor? Okay, thank you.
Any further nominations? Any discussion? If you would take roll call, please.
Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavenga,
Yes.
Mayor Trussigny.
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
and Mr. Rooney. Okay.
I hear a nomination for an engineer.
I'll nominate Van Cleef. A second.
Okay. Is there any discussion concerning that? Any other nominations? Not hearing any. Could we take a roll call, please?
Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavenga,
Yes.
Mayor Trussigny,
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
and Mr. Rooney.
Right, thank you. Thank everyone again. I apologize for no picture right now, but I got an unstable connection, so I'm a little cautious. But thank you again.
Good. We need to hear your voice during the meeting.
There are people still waiting to get into this meeting. Can
I
you
know,
let them in,
I'm
please?
Thank
we're
you.
getting there.
Okay. Do I hear
Oh,
any
Bill, were you
nominations?
able to hear me before?
Yes, we can hear you, Skay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks.
Okay. Do I have a nomination for Board Attorney?
I nominate Scott Wilhelm.
Mr. Mayor nominates Scott Wilhelm. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Don Penrose seconding. Are there any additional nominations? Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavenga,
Yes.
Mayor Trussigny,
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
and Mr. Rooney.
Yes.
Oh, you're on the phone. Good.
On phone, yay.
Thank you very much. I
Happy New
appreciate,
Year.
I appreciate the confidence the board has in me. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for taking it. Do I have any nominations for a planner?
I'll
nominate
nominate Angela Knowles.
I'll second that.
Okay. Mr. Penrose made the motion. Mr. Zwicker seconded. Any additional nominations? Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Hanasak,
Yes.
Mr. Penrose,
Yes.
Mr. Turnbull,
Yes.
Mr. Benjavenga,
Yes.
Mayor Trussigny,
Yes.
Mr. Swicker,
Yes.
Mr. Duffy,
Yes.
Mr. Austin,
Yes.
and Mr. Rooney.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Adoption of scheduled meeting dates and times. You all received a copy of the meeting dates and times for 2022. Do I hear a motion to accept those?
Motion.
Mayor?
Second.
Second? I'm sorry, who was second?
Mr. Hanasak.
Mr. Hanasak, thank you. Is there any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
against? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. We have a redevelopment committee assignments. I'm going to ask Mr. Zwicker to chair this committee as vice chair. Mr.
Yes,
Zwicker,
sir. We'll get
Yeah.
that started and we'll get the group together and have Angela present everything to everybody.
okay, so anyone interested in serving on that committee, please contact Mr. Zwicker before the next meeting so he can present who's on the committee next meeting. Okay. The official newspaper, do I hear a motion for the Express Times and the Star Ledger as the official newspapers?
So move.
Mr. Rooney,
Yes.
is there a second?
Second.
You get that, Kelly?
Who was the second?
I did, Kelly.
I'm still trying to let people in.
Okay, Keith Zwicker, a second.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any against? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. Got Could I have a motion for adoption of Robert Rules of Order as parliamentary procedures?
Motion.
That's the mayor. Do I have a second?
Second.
Mr. Hanasek? Okay, any discussion on that? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? Motion passes. A motion for the authorization of professional contracts?
So what you're doing here is just authorizing, advising the town that you need the professionals and authorizing the town or asking the town to enter into the contracts with the professionals.
Okay.
So move.
I'll
Okay,
second it.
Mr. Rooney motioned and Mr. Penrose second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any against? Any abstentions? The ayes have it. A resolution 2022-1 adopting emergency remote meeting protocol procedures and requirements for public participation at remote meetings. Do I have a motion to accept this resolution?
Motion.
Second.
Second.
Wicker. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any against? Okay. So that takes care of the reorganization portion of this meeting.
Mr. Chairman, the only thing that I noticed compared to last year is that last year at this time you appointed an conflict engineer. Don't know if the board is interested in doing that at the present time, but they did do that at the last year's reorganization meeting. It's not necessary, but it's up to you. It can be done at any time, but
Last year, we did appoint a conflict engineer. What a conflict engineer is for is if Stan would have any conflicts with any of the applicants coming before the board. The other thing is we then have to make sure that the conflict engineer does not have any conflicts with that person. We didn't need a conflict engineer, luckily, throughout this past year. And I think, and we've done this in the past, we can have an engineer come in if there is a conflict, and we make sure that there is no conflict with the conflict engineer. We can have an engineer appointed for that application. I don't personally see a need for this, but if someone differs with me, please speak up. I'd like to have the discussion.
I agree, Chairman.
Thank you.
I also. If we need it, we can get it.
Okay, so we're gonna pass on that. Okay, is there anything else, Mr. Wilhelm?
no, not for reorganization. I would just suggest that you go out of order and take approval of the minutes, maybe get that out of the way.
I was thinking that also. You all got copies of the minutes in your packets. Do I hear a motion for the minutes of 12/16/2021 and 12/20/2021?
Make a motion, we approve the minutes of both meetings, 16 and 20.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Zwicker. Second,
I'll second.
Mr. Austin, second. Okay, is there any discussion? Does anybody have any additions, deletions, corrections for the minutes? No? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any against? Any abstentions? Okay. Now we'll go into the public hearing. Perone Construction LLC, 170 Howard Street, Block 2101, Lot 4. At this time, I am going to recuse myself and turn the meeting over to Mr. Zwicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Zwicker, if I can be of assistance right now.
Sure.
I believe there were two other persons who were accused themselves previously. And we need to see if they're going to continue to recuse themselves so we can address a quorum. And previously that was Mayor Tersigni and Mr. Bensavenga. So
Yes, yes, Mr. Wilhelm.
okay,
Yes, Mr. Wilhelm.
okay. So I think it would be appropriate now for Ms. Leffler to take attendance again for this application so we can see if we need to pull in any alternates. Sorry, Mr. Zwicker, just trying to.
No problem. That's appreciate it.
Mr. Penrose. He's here.
I'm here.
Mr. Turnbull. Mr. Benjavenga. Mayor Terstigny, who recused themselves. Mr. Zwicker.
Yes.
Mr. Duffy. And Mr. Brodsman is not here. Mr. Hanasak is here. So one, two. So we have 5. So we pull in our alternate 1 and 2.
No, I think we have 4, correct? Zwicker, Turnbull, Hanasak, and Penrose.
And
Yes.
Austin.
Well, but he's an alternate, so hold on. Just regular members, we have 4, correct?
Oh.
We have 4, correct.
Okay, we would like to try to establish a quorum. A quorum of 9 is 5. So now that there are absences or recusals, we go to the first alternate. And I believe Mr. Austin is the first alternate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So Mr. Austin, are you willing to consider this application?
Yes.
Do you have any grounds or reasons to excuse yourself or recuse yourself?
No.
Okay, then we've established a quorum, so the application can proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Wilhelm.
Yep.
All right, Stan, you on? Stan?
Yes, sir, I'm here. I'm here.
All right, so we're going to go into the completeness and the public hearings. The completeness is quite long, and there's a lot of people here at the meeting. Now, meeting usually goes to 10:30 with 5-minute increments for people, public speaking. That being said, if it takes as many meetings as it takes for everyone to get heard and everything to go through, that's what we will do. In the same token, 5 minutes is a long time. Anybody that has a stake in this town, is a property owner, a resident, will have his or their time to speak. So once we get through the completeness and we go through our documentation, we open it up to the public, everyone will have a chance to say. That being said, if outside interests start talking, time limits may be enforced. I just want to get that cleared up before we get started. Hopefully I didn't say anything out of place, Mr. Wilhelm, but that's how I feel.
No, just a couple of brief comments, Mr. Zwicker. We would want anybody who speaks at public comment or during the application to direct their questions to you, and then you can farm them out as necessary. As it relates to completeness, we did completeness last time. We're just going to kind of reaffirm completeness with Mr. Schreck. And then we can go right into the substance of the application.
Yes, but there was just a lot of documentation that had to be cleared up.
Correct.
So Stan, if you want to start and go through your technical review.
Well, it's the applicant's show tonight, but I do agree that we should probably reaffirm completeness because we gave completeness with several temporary waivers. I believe we only had one temporary waiver at the time, and that was for the size this drawing scale. So, Mark, you okay if we go through this at this point?
Yes, and we do have our site engineer, Brad Bowler, with us.
Okay. All right, so if the board has our latest report, a report dated December 31st, 2021, consisting of 42 pages. We
Stanley,
begin.
let's,
Yes, sir.
Scott, we don't need to have these professionals sworn in again because they were sworn in before. Is that correct?
Well, Mr. Streck does not need to be sworn in, but the applicant's professionals will be, except for Mr. Bowler, who was previously sworn in at the last meeting.
Okay, so we need Mr. Peck
Okay.
signed in, sworn in?
No, not as the applicant's attorney.
Oh, okay,
So,
Yeah.
so we're good for right now.
okay, thank you.
Well, Scott, if you're going to swear Mr. Bowler in, you should do him now because he's going to be working with me on reviewing the checklist.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, I was already sworn in last go around. I
Yeah.
can affirm that I'm under oath still, if you want.
There you go. He affirmed.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks.
All right, the same guy.
Yep.
Okay. All right, again, so picking up, it's page 3 of our report dated December 31st, 2001. We began with a general submission checklist, and Brad, you're going to probably just answer these as how you're going to see your testimony to tonight. So the first was regarding the development checklist, and I believe you would give testimony on that this evening.
Yeah, so,
Development staging, rather.
on staging, we don't have any staging for this project. It's built in one phase. And we added a note to the notes plan under special condition notes, number 5.
Okay, fine. Taxes and assessments, Kelly, we're still clear on taxes?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Next is fees. I believe applicants paid sufficient fees. We've been monitoring that. On preliminary site plan submission checklist. Application for preliminary shall reflect the review and design guidelines. You'll be providing testimony along those lines tonight, Brad.
Yes, the design guidelines have been outlined on our site plan sheet and fully compliant.
Okay. Drawing scale, that's what we gave the waiver for, due to the size of the property and being ecologically minded that we don't want to lose paper. Going to page 5, applicant information, that's been updated, Brad? Name and address of the applicant, owner of the maps, preparing the plans.
That's correct. It's on the cover sheet.
I believe that's correct. That, yeah, we were asking for that new cover sheet because of the additional properties. Plan information, acreage, municipal, we're okay.
On the cover sheet now, yes.
Key map. Yeah, key map's been provided with zone boundaries within a quarter of a mile.
Yes.
Going to page 6, plan information again, all existing proposed signs, utilities, and size and type. It's within the property. Completed, Brad, or we're
Yes.
get
on our site
information
plan.
is needed on that.
On our site plan sheet, the proposed signage is shown schematically. It's compliant with the code, but it's shown on the site plans.
We're look at TV, all of them.
Okay, if we're missing anything on utility, I can pick that up. All conditions within 200 feet of the property line?
Yes, we prepared a separate sheet that would show that plan, and that's been submitted to the board.
Okay. It's heat analysis. I don't think we have anything updated on that, do we? Analysis of existing utilities and capacity. We could provide testimony on that as we go through
Yes.
the application.
Yeah, you asked us to confirm if we're in a sewer service area. We did confirm that. We do not have a sewer letter that does a will serve, but we did have previous approval from the board on a different application. had more than adequate sewer service at the time.
All right, we'll get to that then. Plan detail, location, all existing sidewalks, proposed sidewalks, with dimensions all within 100 feet of the site.
Yes, we prepared a separate sheet C-104 for that.
All right.
that plan.
In September, you were asking for temporary relief or a condition of final approval. That's been updated though?
Yes.
Okay. Traffic impact, you provided an additional report.
Correct.
And you'll be providing traffic testimony as we continue through the evening or next evening or the evening after that. Easements and right-of-ways. I believe that's correct. If there's any other dedications, will be decided as the application proceeds. Agree?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, we're up to date on that.
Okay. Additional properties, we've added the properties other properties that are related as down towards South Main Street, but there may be other discussions as we talk about Howard Street. So I would say there'll be testimony during the application. Plans and profiles within 100 feet.
That was
Now,
provided as
Are you still requesting a temporary waiver? That was on your,
that was part of our site plan resubmission sheets C-801 through 803.
copy. Sewage disposal, water supply, we just had a comment. You just mentioned on the sewage disposal on the utilities here. We'll have a discussion when we get into that.
Yep, and we do show the water.
You had regarding.
Go ahead, Stan. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Right, but for sewage disposal capacity, for sewage disposal capacity, we don't have will serve letters at this time from anyone, do we?
Everyone but the sewer department. That was just submitted to the board.
Okay. So we still need sewer. Phasing, we just discussed earlier, only be one phase.
That's correct.
Okay, almost, just bear with me once more. I think we're complete with the checklist at this point. So temporary waivers have been addressed, Chairman, and the permanent waiver is still standing for the scale of the drawing. So I would recommend the board. Well, you already deemed it complete. We're confirming that it was deemed complete. Agree with that, Scott?
Yes, I would just ask, for a voice vote here, Mr. Zwicker, to confirm, to make sure no board members have any questions regarding completeness.
Yes, if any board member has any questions with Stan going over our completeness. If not, a yay vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Any
What's next?
Mr.
All right,
Any
Mark,
abstention?
all yours.
Right. Hold on, any abstentions or opposition?
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Counselor.
No worries.
You're good, Stan.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for deeming us complete. For the record, my name is Mark Peck. I'm an attorney with the Florio Prucci Law Firm here on behalf of the applicant, Peron Construction LLC. And we're here tonight on our application for preliminary site plan approval with bulk variance relief. We've just been deemed complete, reaffirming the completeness determination of September 23rd of 2021. We had previously noticed for the October board meeting for the hearing, but that was carried through several meetings to tonight. We were told there was no need to renotice, but notwithstanding that, we did renotice, and we've provided the necessary affidavit with the proofs to the board secretary. So the board does have jurisdiction to proceed this evening with the hearing.
And I
As
did,
noted,
Mr. Peck, I did have an opportunity to review your documents, and Mr. Zwicker, I concur that the jurisdiction's been established.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilhelm. So as noted, we're seeking preliminary site plan approval with bulk variance relief to permit the construction of an approximately 420,000 square foot industrial building with associated improvements on land located at 170 Howard Street, which is block 2102, lot 2.02, and to raise the structures at 560 and 562 South Main Street, which is lots 1 and 3 in block 2015, and that'd be for roadway improvements and signal reconstruction to accommodate traffic to and from the site. 170 Howard Street is located within District 5 of the amended Phillipsburg Riverfront Redevelopment Area, or RRA 5, as well as in Phillipsburg's Industrial Heavy, or I2 zone district, which permits the proposed industrial use, and that's approximately 31.1 acres. The South Main Street properties total 0.16 acres, and they're in the R50 zone district. The property is bordered by a pistol range, industrial uses, and a rail line. We're seeking several C or bulk variances in connection with this application. And these include to allow some parking area to not be screened by landscaping as required by section 625-25I in your code, to permit the non-residential driveway to exceed 30 feet in width at the property line and 40 feet at the curb line, contrary to 625-30B, to permit new construction without the required off-street loading spaces per section 625-31A and also 625-31C, to permit fewer parking spaces than required by section 625-32B1, and to allow the removal of naturally wooded buffers in some areas contrary to section 625-12A1. And of course, we will seek, and we noticed that we'll seek any additional variances, waivers, or exceptions identified by the board that I may have missed in my recital right now, or that are discovered in the course of the hearing. We do have a number of witnesses who will be offering testimony. We, in the order, proposed order of presentation, we're going to have Michael Perucci, who's a principal with the applicant. We have Rob DeBeer, who's the director of development for the applicant. Then we have our site engineer, Brad Bowler, our architect, Oliver Franklin, our traffic engineer, John Wichner, and our planner, John McDonough. We also have 2 witnesses on standby should their testimony be required, but we're not planning on presenting direct testimony from them. And those would be Richard Lev, who's our environmental expert and LSRP, and also Gregory Mascola, who is our landscape architect. And before I proceed with our first witness, we acknowledge that there's interest in this application. And there's been some press reports, the most recent about the veto of ordinance 2021-27. And I just wish to remind the board that we're proceeding pursuant to ordinance 2021-14, which has not been repealed, and it provides the applicable land use framework for the board's consideration of this application. And as noted by Mr. Bowler's recent testimony, we've received the latest Van Cleef review letter dated December 31 of 2021, and our witnesses will be further addressing the comments in that letter through their testimony. But I did wish to note one point, and that's that the review letter references the proposed Howard Street extension and states that it's a requirement of this board's consistency report, which on the ordinance. And this misstates the report, which recommends, it doesn't require, and it recommends to the town council that it take steps to facilitate and create the Howard Street extension. The Howard Street extension is not a part of this application. You know, our plans have not been engineered to account for that, and it's just not part of what we are presenting. We agree that the extension is a preferable alternative, but the applicant's been unable to acquire any of the privately owned lots that would be necessary for construction of the extension. And in fact, the owner of those lots have testified before this board and the council that he's unwilling to sell. So instead, we've acquired those.
This is why we need to get back to in-person meetings, even if we have to hold it in a gymnasium. This is,
All of them should have been removed.
thanks, Rob. Or take a second here. It's sad. It really is. You're talking about something that's very important to the town, very important to a lot of people, and that is not funny. And it's on behalf of the board, I apologize to everybody. It's a shame.
Yes, this is Aaron Coleman. If you guys want to return to in-person meetings, I'll be more than happy to do the COVID spraying for free. I do have a residential and commercial cleaning company, so I will be more than happy to do that for all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Yeah, I'm back in. All right, thanks. Sorry
Rob,
about that.
Rob, how we looking?
Yeah.
I have four people in the waiting room who are just changing their names. I don't feel comfortable letting them in.
Keep them out.
Yes, keep them out.
Keep them out. If somebody wants to get in appropriately, you let them in, but keep them out. This is absurdity. Mr.
Yeah.
Peck, obviously, we apologize to you and the applicant. So
Sign of the times.
Yeah, terrible. Mr. Peck, if I could just clarify, in Mr. Schreck's review letter, there's 14 variances that he addresses. You just referenced 4 of them. Can you clarify whether you're pursuing all 14 that are referenced in Mr. Schreck's letter, which starting on page 11?
Yeah, to the extent that Mr. Schreck has identified additional variances, we'll be seeking those.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Zwicker.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Peck, you want to try to continue?
Yes, I was speaking, as you may recall, I was speaking on the Howard Street extension. And we're unable to acquire those properties despite our best efforts. We'll continue trying to acquire those properties, but it's been made pretty clear that the owner won't sell. So the only way to get the Howard Street extension right now is for the town to exercise its power of eminent domain. We, as the applicant, as the property owner, we don't have that power. We endorse any efforts by the town. We'll support any efforts by the town, will contribute towards any efforts of that town, but we can't initiate that. We just don't have the power. And the New Jersey Supreme Court has consistently held that land use boards cannot obligate an applicant to acquire another's property needed for off-track improvements, just like a board cannot consider off-site traffic congestion as a reason to reject an application. So with that all being said, we're ready to proceed, and I'd like to call the applicant's first witness.
Before we get started, though, I'd like to state that when we approved this, going back to the change to industrial to residential, it was residential traffic. And the residential traffic then was allowed to go onto McKean Street. As part of the board then and as part of the board now, I think our board and the consensus of our planner is still reverts back to the original traffic going through Howard Street, and the property being industrial then would go back to the 204, 205 plan for that. We can continue on as far as the warehouse on Howard Street, but the extensions, I think we can listen to them and take your testimony. But I think as far as the board and as far as other constraints, that will we be left to legal and to the council. Is that all right?
As much as I'd like to listen to the debate between Mr. Peck and Mr. Zwicker, I think in fairness to the applicant and the public, Mr. Peck gave his opening statement. Let's hear the testimony, and then the board will be able to ask questions. And then Mr. Peck at some point will have a closing argument. And at that time, you can ask him very probing questions, Mr. Zwicker, and the board can. But in fairness to everyone, including the public, I think let's let them put on their case, and then they can sum up their arguments at the end.
That's what I was getting to. Sorry, Mr. Peck.
No, thank you very much, and I appreciate your comments. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to call our first witness.
Sure.
Okay, and that witness will be Michael Perucci. Now he's on with Rob DeBeer, who will also be testifying. So if the Rob DeBeer can be unmuted, that would be great.
Scott, you want to swear them in?
Yes, I'm just looking for them on my screen.
You got to be careful.
Okay, they're sitting next to one another. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Perucci and Mr. DeBeer, do you swear or affirm that your testimony in front of the land use board will be the truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Perucci, what is your relationship with the applicant, Peron Construction LLC?
I'm the main owner of Peron Construction LLC.
Okay.
And I acquired this property back in 2006, the Tipton and Wood industrial site, as well as the adjacent site, which was approximately 35 acres. Even though it was industrial, I went back to the town council at that time and asked for a redevelopment zone to create a residential neighborhood. At the time, I had Centex, one of the largest residential builders in America out of Dallas, Texas, as my partner. We entered into a joint venture, which lasted about a year. They did due diligence, and they decided to walk away from the project. One of their difficulties was with the site that it was between a junkyard and an open gun range. And as they did more and more market studies, they found that it probably would not be viable for that company to do a residential project. So for the last 15 years, I have tried very diligently. I've talked to every national, regional, local home builders to try to get someone to partner with me in regard to residential. And the only one that ever came forward was a developer out of Newark that wanted to do 2 8-story tenement buildings, which obviously we rejected. In 2013, we tried to convert it to apartments, and that did not work as well. I do build apartments with partners, Woodmont Muse and Edgewood Properties, and both of them rejected the project. So, here I am 15 years later with this property. Spent most of my life in Phillipsburg and Lapacon, and it seems to me that the best use or only use for this property is to take it back to industrial. So in that regard, I've asked the council, which initially passed this, to rezone it back to the industrial site. I've listened to a lot of the council meetings and the planning board meetings, and I understand some of the opposition. And I would just like to say that it seems to me the most important issue is traffic. Phillipsburg, as you know, in the last 60 years, from 1960, we had 18,600 people living in town. We have 14,500 now. So we're 22% below. Ingersoll Rand used to have almost 6,500 people working there. And so it's created a situation in town that I grew up in. When I was in high school, everybody's dad and grandfather and uncle worked at Ingersoll Rand. And so job creation appears to me to be the most important thing right now and the best use of this particular property. The poverty rate in Phillipsburg is 16 to 17%. The national average is 11. The median income is 26,000. The national one is 62,000. Our unemployment in our town of Phillipsburg is running about 3 points higher than the region of the Lehigh Valley. This particular project would create, I believe, about 200 to 300 jobs. I call the area the flats. As you look at that particular area, there are a number of people that do not have automobiles. This would create an opportunity for these people to walk to work. And I think if you look at the billboards around Phillipsburg and the Lehigh Valley, and if you've seen the Express a couple of days ago, these warehouse logistical manufacturing facilities are now paying, because of the shortage of workers, anywhere from $25 to $35 an hour. So that kind of excited me to be able to create those types of jobs in my hometown. And, you know, we could talk about that, but I think the main topic that I'd like to impress upon the board is the traffic issue. LMR gentleman, Robert, has indicated he doesn't want to sell the property, and I respect that. So what we did was we went out and acquired the house at the corner of McKean Street and South Main Street in order to allow the trucks a wider road that they can turn right onto South Main Street, and they're 3 miles from 78. And that would be the main route. We would encourage, the town to prohibit weight restrictions so trucks cannot turn left. This would help the SMP trucks, the Atlantic State trucks, and all the other trucks in the industrial zone to be forced to be able to turn right, as opposed to going around Sidgrave Street and Stockton to make that left. That would allow, and I think our traffic engineers will testify, that will allow the trucks to immediately exit the town of Phillipsburg. The difference between turning on McKean Street versus a Howard Street extension is 1,400 feet. That's the extent of what Howard Street extension would provide, an extra 1,400 feet to exit the town. If you're familiar with the Phillipsburg Mall, that's about the difference between Taco Bell and Panera's. So, we believe this area is really just geared for industrial and job creation. And we're excited that if we could create those kind of jobs, people making $50,000 to $70,000 in downtown Phillipsburg, whether they live on Mercer Street or South Main Street, would be extremely positive for the town. It'd be extremely positive for the merchants, the restaurants there. People would have, disposable money. And I believe there would be no trucks turning left. And I did hear from the downtown merchants people that testified. I accept and respect their concerns. I agree with that. Trucks should not be allowed to turn left, and we would be totally supportive of that. I think the residential, and I'll just stop with this, I think Phillipsburg needs more residents, and I think the Union Square project that the mayor and council are working on would be a great boon to increasing the residential. But I believe after 15 years, I just cannot get residential off the ground on this property. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Mr. Perucci.
Anybody,
Yes.
anybody on the board have any questions, or you want to just continue with the rest of the stuff and come back, Mr. Peck?
Yeah,
How do you want to proceed?
Unless it's questions regarding his ownership, which he testified to, and his views, we should just focus on the application and then have a more robust conversation at the end.
Yeah, I'm all for that. Is that all right? Yes.
Thank you.
So. Anybody on the
Okay,
board?
great.
If not,
Next. Yeah, I was going to say, if you have no questions for Mr. Perucci, then we can proceed to our next witness. If there's no, public questions for him either. Mr. De Beers not going to be testifying. at this time. He will most likely testify later as to some use aspects if there's a need to. So I'm going to call our site engineer, Mr. Brad Bowler, who has previously testified and has previously been sworn.
Okay,
And just for the record for Ms. Leffler, I believe we have his CV. The board had accepted him as an engineering expert, and we marked that as Exhibit A1, Ms. Leffler.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Is Brad
Okay.
on?
Yes.
There's a hand raised. Yeah, there's a hand raised, Chairman. I don't know if that was a question directed toward Mr. Perucci.
Well,
no,
let's,
that's the public comment. We're going to wait to the end. Now,
right.
I just asked for board comment at this particular time.
Okay. All
So,
right.
Mark, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Bowler, you're familiar with the subject property?
Yes, I am.
And did you prepare the site plans that are under review by this board?
They were prepared under my supervision.
Okay, great. Do you want to lead the board through your site plan?
Sure. I'll start with the first exhibit. I'll present that to the board. It'll be, I'll mark it A2.
We're going to mark that A5 just because Mr. Peck and I had discussed the CV. So we're going to call this A5, Ms. Leffler.
Okay, so hopefully the board and the public can see an aerial exhibit up on the screen. This is dated. I'll zoom in on the date so the board can see it for record purposes of the video. 9/23/2021. What this shows is the property, subject property in question where the development of the industrial building would be placed in red, north being to the top of the page. The site is surrounded by the Pistol Club, which is to the northwest corner in this location up here. There's industrial along the northern side of the property as well as the eastern side. The rail line does traverse the property to the south along the river, Delaware River, and there is a park that's to the southwest portion of the property. As Mr. Peck mentioned, it's in District 5 of the redevelopment zone as well as the I2 zone for the property. And the only frontage as of right now is Howard Street, but it does intersect with the intersection of McKean as well, with a slight frontage on that portion as well. The site previously had approvals, like Mr. Perucci had mentioned, for the property, but as of right now, the site is essentially vacant. There was an industrial building to the eastern northeast portion of the property that was removed. The foundations are still in place, but the property does remain generally unmaintained. There is a environmental action cleanup that's set to occur as part of a capping process through an LSRP program, which will one of our consultants is working through as part of the development of the property, and we'll go into this a little bit more detail when we go through development. Our proposal would act as a cap for the property. So that would be the process for the environmental cleanup on site, which would be a capping procedure only. From a drainage perspective, topography wise, it does drain or slope about 40 feet from Howard Street up the northwest corner down towards the rail line border in that location. It's about a 40-foot differential in grade. And almost all the stormwater does flow in the southern direction towards the river. Some across the park, but mostly concentrated towards the rail line at this location. The one last thing I would just note is that this site did previously have an LOI, a letter of interpretation absence determination. So no wetlands on the site.
Oh, crap.
As proposed by the previous application. We have provided a site walkthrough and did not provide see any evidence that a wetland had formed since the LOI was issued. So we believe the wetlands again is absent from the property for our site. And that's it for the existing conditions. I will move into the proposed conditions, which will be Exhibit A6. This will be. Hopefully the board can now see the colorized rendering. Is that the case? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is a colorized version of our site plan, overall site plan sheet. What we have is the green is landscape areas, the brown are mulch areas or bioretention basins. The gray is pavement and concrete, and the tan is the building proposed on the site. And I'll zoom in and as we walk through the actual exhibit itself. But again, this exhibit is dated 11/22/2021, just so that the recording shows specifically. Again, north is to the top of the page for the purposes of presentation. So the proposal is for a 420,000 square foot warehouse, which is the tan box in the middle of the building. We do have this building sited along Howard Street, which runs east to west at this location. At the front yard setback of 35 feet, that's compliant front yard setback at that location. We do have side yard setbacks, which would be to the location all the way to the right of the plan of approximately 475 feet. And then we do have a rear yard setback, which would be the southern portion of the park area where we share the property line, approximately 130 feet, all of which are compliant with the code for setbacks on the building. The building is approximately 49 feet high, where 50 feet is allowed. So it's also a compliant building height. And I'll talk about this in my grading discussion, but the building is sunk down from Howard Street in general along the frontage by about 10 feet. So the appearance of the building, while it may be 49 feet high, will only appear to be about 39 feet high from the street on an average grade perspective. So we do propose a number of access points to get to the facility. So one would be a full movement driveway near the intersection of McKean and Howard in this location right here at the eastern portion of the property. And that allows for both trucks and cars to enter this facility on the eastern side of the property. Moving westbound along Howard Street, we also do have one additional full movement driveway at this location to the west side of the building. This location of the driveway is essentially the last, it aligns with the second to last driveway or business that's prior to the pistol range entrance. So there's one more property beyond the driveway at that location. Essentially, we're at the end of the road at that spot. The driveways are 35 feet at the western side and 40 feet at the eastern side. The reason the 40 feet is in place is because of the McKean Street intersection. It's essentially to create a three-leg intersection at that location and align with those curb lines for McKean Street. Along Howard Street, we do have 35 feet. That's more of the normal for an entrance to the facility on the property, and it does allow for proper truck turning on both locations. With regards to one of the waivers that we are requesting, we do have a waiver for the width of the driveway at the curb, and that's at the location of this driveway where it's 140 feet. And that's due generally to the radiuses that are provided for truck turning. We have larger radiuses that trucks can exit the facility without crossing over the middle of the property and also enter the facility accordingly. And that does generate a larger radius from a waiver perspective. That's really all I had from a true access perspective on this location. One of the comments that Mr. Schreck had as part of his first review of our application was the request for emergency egress onto the site. So I'll zoom in on the western side of the property. We did add a grass paver location at this area right here to the existing driveway that does traverse our site. So this driveway is on our property, and we did provide that for cross access. In the event that one of the driveways does get shut down, we need to use this location for emergency access to hit the ordinance criteria. One of Mr. Schreck's comments was that he asked for proper circulation, and we feel that cars can exit through this facility in an emergency situation. However, if the board feels that it's necessary, we do have the ability to stripe out a second parking space and provide a mountable curb in this location so that people can have a little more room to exit. But from a car turning perspective, they do have the ability to do that at that location. Zooming out to more of the pedestrian facilities, Mr. Perucci mentioned this during his opening statement that his hope was that some of the folks in town would be able to walk to the facility. So our proposal is to provide a sidewalk along the entire frontage of Howard Street that's ADA accessible throughout. And that runs from the western boundary all the way down to the eastern boundary where the intersection of McKean Street is an ADA accessible route. In addition to that, we do have pedestrian access for the facility off the street into each sides of the building where offices may be. So we have one sidewalk on the eastern side near the parking spaces and one sidewalk on the western side. And again, those will be accessible from an ADA perspective as well, to be able to enter the facility should you walk, take the bus at a different location on the site. And we also provided an ADA accessible route, concrete route, down to a proposed extension of the trail that runs along the rail line. That's shown on the southern portion of the property. And ultimately that would connect at some point into the park that's to the southwest of our facility. That does provide an accessible route at that location. So I'll pause there because I do want to show a third exhibit for my testimony tonight, which would be A7.
Right, Ms. Leffler, did you get this one marked for A6?
No, I did not.
Okay, this is A6, so it's overall site layout plan C301.
C301, okay.
Yeah. Colorized rendering, the date was 11/22. All right, so this last exhibit I'll have for my presentation tonight is this is like we'll call it a view shed for the walking path that I just described. And this was prepared based on one of Mr. Schreck's comments about what the view would be if someone was walking down the path along this facility. And I'll get into some of the nuances of the photos when we get through the landscaping and the site work, but I will talk about it right now. So the first view we'll show is a view looking basically, I'll call it northbound towards the building above the bioretention basin that we propose from the path closest to the Delaware River. The second view would be about 150 or 200 feet to the east, looking at generally in the same direction. So that the board has an idea of where it looks, and that's, you can see the view cones from the viewpoint, which we'll see. And then the third view is from the closest point of where the wall and the truck court would be, which would be approximately a 16-foot high wall plus or minus with a fence on top of that. And I'll show those as well. And again, this is exhibit A7.
Mr. Bowler, what can we call that for the record, please?
Let's call it a view corridor map.
View corridor map.
Exhibit.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'll flip to the first slide. Again, this is view one. So this is a view just directly south of on the path. You can see the plantings in front of the bioretention basin were all evergreens. These heights are at planting, so 6 to 8 feet high as planted. And then they have the shrubs and the annuals and perennials in front of that area. We see the wall in gray behind that area, which is what is elevated above the current path. And then we have a 3.5 foot high board-on-board fence that does provide additional screening along that view. And I'll flip to the next view, which is again same general location, about 200 feet further east. Same idea, evergreen trees at planting height along the wall and the detention basin. You see the wall in the background, and then you see the 3.5 foot high board-on-board fence at that location. And then finally, the view, it's essentially the closest, and I'll zoom in on this on the site plan so we can see that. This is the corner of the wall. Again, evergreen plantings at this location that are at planting height right now, so 6 to 7 feet high, 3.5 foot high board-on-board fence at the top of the wall. So again, you can see that there's a good view protection at those locations along the wall.
Ms. Leffler, we're going to mark these 8, 9, and 10 for completeness of record.
Okay.
And you can just call them view 1, view 2, and view 3. I'm also noting that.
Okay,
We'll talk.
thank you. Oh, yeah, we will.
And I know we didn't submit this to the board, but I'd be happy to email it to Ms. Leffler tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go back to our overall rendering, site plan rendering. And this is again A6. So this one more comment. We do have sidewalk along. It's hard to see on this exhibit without zooming in, so I'll do that slightly. But both of the parking lots do have a sidewalk along the full frontage of the parking spaces so that people that are walking to the facility would have a space to walk along the sidewalks, which is required by code, one of the code sections for the ordinance. So I'll zoom back out so I can talk about circulations around the facility. And we do have full movement circulation throughout the property. Again, I mentioned the 40-foot wide driveway off of McKean next on the 35 feet, a 35-foot wide drive on off of Howard Street at that location as well. And then the drives within the car parking area are all 25 feet wide in accordance with the ordinance. We do have a full drive access along the western and eastern sides of the property, and then our full truck court along the southern side of the property. And in meeting with the fire department and Mr. Streck several months ago, probably in September sometime, if I remember correctly, that was requested so that we had fire lanes along those locations at the facility. We also, in Mr. Streck's letter, have a comment about the fire access along Howard Street. And we are proposing that the fire department does have access after getting their fire letter, their fire truck information. We're able to model that through the wires and the overhead wires at this location. And they do have access to this location. And they also have access via staircases along the wall from our perspective, and was agreed to by the fire department. I believe we received their letter as well, and they concur that that was an acceptable solution for our previous submission. From a parking perspective, on the east side of the property, again, car parking, we have 154 parking spaces and 198 to the west side of the property. It's a total of 352 spaces for the facility, which is in standard with current warehousing facilities as we speak at this time. The ordinance does require 420, but we are proposing, which is 1 per 1,000. We are proposing 352, which is about 1 per 1,200. So the general request and requirements for a warehousing facility is now in the realm of 1 per 1,500. So the ordinance is slightly conservative. We meet in the middle for those facilities. And then we also have 39 trailer spaces for storage purposes at the most western location that will be accessed for trailer storage on these areas. From a loading perspective, we do provide, as of right now, 88 planned docks along the southern side of the property, and that's on the bottom of the plan here. The way the code reads for the town is that loading docks are not considered loading spaces in the grand scheme of the ordinance, but they are used for loading purposes. So we do have a variance for a number of loading spaces required where we have 0 proposed, even though we do have 88 total loading spaces or loading docks for the facility. And if we do look at those loading docks, the spacing between the loading docks is 13 feet wide, which is also a variance from a space perspective based on the fact that the 15 foot is required. But again, this is normal for industry standards for the space sizing and the truck court that's in this location. And in general as well, these docks don't always get used. Sometimes they're used for trash compactors or recycling compactors. So what we see on occasion is when a tenant comes in, and this is all tenant based from a trash perspective, they may ask for a trash compactor to be placed at the last loading dock at this location, at which point those will be put in place and they'll use a loading space at that location. Again, it doesn't deter from the fact that we do have 88 docks and 5 loading zones are required from the facility. I think it's important to note, again, the grading. I mentioned this during existing conditions that there's about a 40-foot grade change from the Stockton Howard Street intersection down to, I'll call it now the proposed path location where the rail line is. So we developed the site as best we could to follow the grading. So again, we have a wall and about a 10-foot differential in grading along the Howard Street side before we have our building. The building does have a 4-foot elevation change between the first floor where you enter to go into the offices along the western and eastern sides for the trucks to dock. And then the grade does drain down further, but there is a requirement for a wall along the southern side of this property. Again, it ranges from about 3 feet high to about 16, 17 feet high. This corner where the pinch point is, and then tapers down at that location. Because of the grading on site, the trailer spaces are about 6 or 7 feet below Howard Street. And then we have a band of evergreen shrubs that surround it. And I'll get into landscaping later. For the parking spaces from a car perspective, the western car lot is about 7 or 8 feet below Howard Street as well. So again, as you're on Howard Street, you'd see the top of the cars most likely. And then as you get to the eastern side, it does catch up towards the grade of the McKean Avenue area, but this parking lot is generally sunk below the grade of McKean and Howard Street intersection, between 1 and 5 feet on the 5 feet being closest to the building. So again, the grade does hide some of those cars at that location. From a stormwater perspective, we have designed the basins wholly to be compliant with the new green infrastructure regulations, and we'll work with Stan as part of our final application to refine the design and provide a report that indicates that. But I can assure the board tonight that the sizes of the basins have been designed in accordance with DEP requirements. The DEP will also have a hand in this application because there's a flood hazard impact along the south portion of the property slightly. So we would have to account for that as part of our application. They will review the clearing. They will also review any community impacts that are required as part of the state code and any clearing requirements as part of any bat habitat or any other habitat that might be around. And we would agree to comply with all those requirements as part of a DEP application. Move on to some of the utilities for the site. So the utilities for the property, again, generally are taken from Howard Street. We do have a sanitary sewer collection system that does drain to the north. So the sewer drains out of the building and then up to the north on Howard Street. We do have a water line extension that goes from approximately where block 2007 lot 7 tag is at this location, down the street, all the way past our driveway and ties in. So we're upgrading the current, I believe it's an 8-inch line to a 12-inch line at the request of the fire department. And we're also taking the water line and extending it up Stockton Street about 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet. I think it's Cedar Alley, where we can tie into another 12-inch line. So again, upgrading those lines at those locations. We also are, at the request of the fire department, replacing the hydrants along Howard Street, along our frontage where they are currently existing. And those hydrants are spaced about 400 feet apart along the frontage. And we are replacing those hydrants, again, at the request of the fire department with a slightly larger line in those areas. The last thing we have is gas and electric also coming from Howard Street for services of the building. We previously had shown on this plan the power lines being proposed underground along Howard Street. Based on our investigation with the fire department apparatus that we have modeled that this is not needed to be removed anymore. So we would keep those lines above ground as they do function appropriately from an operations perspective. I do have 3 more things to hit on, which will be lighting. First, we are proposing LSI LED lights. LSI is the brand of light. LED lights, so it provides a uniform lighting around the facility. We have a number of freestanding lights throughout the parking lot and the drive aisles. We have building lights that are along the building itself on all 4 sides. We have some bollard lights to illuminate the sidewalk as they enter into the facility. And all of those lights are the same brand and the same lighting color so that they match and they provide a proper illumination. With LED, you have the option to provide some very good directional lighting as opposed to the older lights, like metal halide or high pressure sodium where you have to put shields on them. But in addition to having directional lights for our facility, we also provide house side shields, especially along the southern property line. We provide house side shields along those areas. So in general, our light does stay within our general footprint. There's a small slight spillage, as I mentioned before, on the pinch point for the walkway, where there's a little bit of an overlap of lighting to about 0.4, 0.5 foot candles, which is really indiscernible. In general, when it comes down to lighting, it's very low light level. But we basically keep the light shielded inside of our property. So along southern property line and along the northern property lines where the street is at, to the extent of the code. So the code does require that we shield from residential properties, which we don't have any around us, and from roadways. And I would note that we are fully compliant with the lighting design. The lights are 30 feet high, which is the ordinance criteria from a freestanding perspective. Again, house side shields on those, but the rest of the lighting requirements for the town are taken care of. And then from a landscape perspective, we do have 48 shade trees proposed on site in accordance with the requirements. We do have 421 evergreen trees, and that's generally along the park side to enhance the buffer. So replace some of the trees that we're removing at that location for the development, as we are trying to minimize the amount of buffer removal, but we do need to do grading in these locations, provide grass swales. And again, we're providing a buffer all along the southern side of the property with evergreen trees as opposed to shrubs in those locations to provide the best buffering as possible throughout the site. And then finally, we have 600 shrubs on the property, and that's throughout the facility. A lot of them are in the bioretention basins, which will provide natural habitats and water treatment for our facility. But we do also have shrubs along the right-of-way, so that in addition to the grading that we have for the parking lots, we also will have the evergreen shrubs shielding the parking lot itself. And then finally, the last thing we have before I guess I jump into the review letters with Stan is that we do have signs proposed on the site. We don't have a specific tenant in mind yet, so we have generic signage, but essentially we have 2 permitted signs for the facility, ground signs, which we'll propose, and each of them will be no larger than 65 square feet for a total of 130 square feet for 2 signs. And they'll be located at the entrances to the facility. So one at the western entrance and one at the eastern entrance. And then we do have the option for a wall sign not to exceed 50% of the facade. And that's 1 per business. So if there's 1 tenant on this facility, we'd propose that we'd have 1 sign. If there's 2 tenants and this happens to be a 2-tenant building, we'd have 2 signs. Again, no more than 50% of the facade, but we're not proposing any variances or waivers from the signage at this point. And that concludes my direct with regards to the project. And before we get into the letter, I guess I'll ask the board if they want to ask questions. I know I went through a lot there.
Any members of the board have any questions for Mr. Bogle? Tony? Unmute yourself.
Sorry. How long is the building? Just so I can get a sense for the scale. Along the Howard Street.
Mr. Baller?
I think it's about 1,200 feet long. I'm just getting the exact number for you. Give me 1 second. Yeah, it's about 1,200 feet long.
And the space between the street and the building, is there any room you can put some other plantings to help shield that building from the Howard Street perspective? Because I think on the site plan you said grasses. Is that something that you would consider, or the applicant?
Yeah, sure. We can certainly do that. It's a little bit of a steeper slope in that location, so I'm happy to try to continue the street trees down the street and to put some more shrubs there. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I just feel like that 1,200 feet in that street is just going to be whoa, with nothing between the street and the building.
Sure. So we can look to do that. It's not an issue.
Thanks.
I have a question, just kind of in the on the
Yeah,
same note. How far back is the structure from the river's edge? And then a kind of a follow-up to that, you had pointed out the plantings that will be going along the river side of the building. About how tall will those plantings get over time?
That's a good question. So the river's edge is a tough measurement. So if you can just give me 1 second. The reason I say that is because our property is not along the river. It's actually somewhat beyond it. So if you give me a second, I would say from our property line to the edge of the river, it's about 200 to 250 feet. So at the point where the closest building is, and I'll share my screen again. So sorry about that. This dimension is about 400 feet or 350 feet or so, because at this location, the river bows out away from the property line. So I would say an average is about 400 feet from river's edge. If you take the entire length of the property up until about the eastern car parking lot where it peels away.
Right. Okay. And the building was how tall again?
It's 49 feet tall, based on the code, and that would be, again, from Howard Street, it would look like it's 39 feet tall because there's about a 10-foot grade differential at that location.
Okay. I'm just trying to get a sense of what that might look like from the river if you were, on the river and looking over towards the building, just, in terms of how tall those plantings might get over time, just how visible it might be from the river front as well.
Sure. So that's one of the questions you had asked about. The plantings over time generally grow between, it takes some time, but 25 and 35 feet high, maybe even up to 50 feet high in some of these species. It does take some time though. Generally a plant, the plants that you plant up front, the first year you plant them, they don't grow very much. The second year they grow slowly, and then the third year they start growing their average rate, which will be between 8 and 12 inches, maybe sometimes higher if there's really good conditions.
Okay.
Hey, Brad, is there not some existing tree cover between the site and the river?
That is true. Yes, I was going to get there, but yeah, that's correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Anybody else on the board? Stan, do we want to do any public now, or do we
Hey,
want to
Brad,
wait
that
till the end?
just 1 second.
No, Mr. Zwicker, hopefully the witnesses and our professionals will be able to address a lot of questions. If we open up to the public, there may be questions
No,
we can
that's what I
avoid.
thought too. All right, the only comment I have is you're gonna put the walk trail. You're gonna try to, if we need be, we can connect that to the trail that's already there, and you will continue that out through the rest of the property.
That's correct. So we ended at our property line, which is, candidly, it's within 3 or 4 feet of the current trail on the park side. So a small connection, and we could work with the town at a future date if we decide to do that. And then that would end at the most eastern portion of the property line. So I'll show this on my screen so the board gets an idea of where it ends. The trail runs all the way to the east, if you can see my cursor, and then ends at the most eastern property line at that location.
What about the floodplain?
Jimmy, we'll get that at the end, okay?
With the floodplain with regards to the walk or something else?
Now that Mr. Flynn brought it up, flooding, how does that pertain to the building?
Sure. So the floodplain currently on site is in approximately this area. And as part of the NJDEP requirements, we have to balance out that flooding on our facility. And we do that by creating storage in this location right here. And we provided calculations as part of our design, and that's been accounted for in our calculations. And we had a pre-application meeting with the DEP. So we are compliant with the code. We'd have to go through the DEP permitting process, but that would be accounted for, and we have to meet their criteria.
Not retention ponds, floodplain, 100, 200-year floodplain?
Yeah,
Yes.
Mr. Zwicker.
Yeah, let's
We're not, it's not time for public comment, so we're gonna cut that off until we've heard all the testimony. I think it's only fair to everybody.
He's muted.
I did have another question about the circulation and the truck traffic. As you mentioned, you were probably anticipating some questions around that. You know, the town's been doing a lot of work around revitalizing the main street. There's the town had received grant funding to do streetscapes and beautification projects, but also bringing jobs and businesses to the main street. As you can imagine, there's a concern that bringing truck traffic onto Main Street would, impact, I guess, that work that's been going on. I guess I would just want to know if the Howard Street extension, which I agree was recommended and not required, but it was strongly recommended, and also to the point that it didn't really seem like it could work to have trucks even going on to the main street, even if they weren't turning left, just that impact to the main street there. What would you be willing to do to make sure that doesn't impact the main street, in terms of any further beautification or just anything to kind of help that effort along the main street?
So I think that's more a question for our traffic engineer, and maybe Mr. Peck can chime in a little bit as well on that.
Yeah, I would also indicate, as Mr. Perucci testified earlier, we have absolutely no problem with the board imposing a condition restricting the left turns onto South Main Street.
I understand that. There's still residents that are to the right, going south, I guess, on Main Street. So, I guess I think the community would like to hear, and probably, another recommendation that was in that report was that the applicant work with the local businesses and residents in that area to come up with a solution that really satisfies everybody. And if the Howard Street extension is not something that's going to happen, then I think everybody needs to be on the same page with how it's going to work on the main street.
Yeah, and then we're going to provide additional testimony with our traffic engineer.
Okay, thank you.
Now the second to back up to the walkway. Brad, can you pull up your exhibit again?
Oh, sure. You can see it now?
Yeah, yes, affirmative. As I recall, the Riverview of Delaware Station project had some connectivity of that trail back up to McKean Street, with realization that continuing further south on that trail was would happen over a period of time and not immediately. There you go. So we had the trail, that's on the Phillipsburg Heritage Trail Plan also. I believe it was turning up to meet McKean Street. So people could continue, if they're walking that trail, they just don't come to the end. They can continue out someplace. So we'd probably look for some pedestrian, some way of getting them up to McKean Street. And
Stan, we actually propose an ADA accessible sidewalk that comes down there.
Okay, that's not a wall, that's sidewalk. That's fine. Okay, thank you.
The
All
reason
right, the other
looks like this is because it's ADA accessible, so it has to move.
Copy.
Shape
All
of
right.
the word. Yep.
Yeah, the other another issue that was of a concern with Riverview at Delaware Station was some kind of acknowledgement of the Morris Canal being through that property. I believe there was some signage that was posted that was going to be placed within the within that development, and the county canal committee had some input into that. We probably want them to take a look at this site too and have whatever input they would for maintaining some recognition of what was there.
Yes, that's not an issue. We'll work with them, Stan.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, Tim?
No, I'm good.
All right. Mark?
Yeah, Mr. Bowler, would you like to go through the Van Cleef review letter and address some points that maybe you did not address in your testimony already?
Sure. I'll try to run through this quickly unless the board prefers to do this at the end of all the witnesses. It's up to the board, I guess.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So we had gone through the first 10 pages, or sorry, I guess it would be 9 pages of the Van Cleef letter. On page 10, it's a zoning chart, so didn't indicate any variances. I just wanted to note that for the board. But starting on page 11, I don't have any testimonial items on here. We would agree to, I guess, the letter B, 1B is addressed. 1A we'll work with the fire department on any comments they further have. I have their review letter from the 21st of October, and there's very minor comments left. So I would work with the fire department offline to address all their comments in the October 21st, 2021 review letter. With regards to letter 1C, I provided testimony on that, but again we'll do no repairs on the car parking lot. So no repairs will happen on the facility. I can testify to that. Letter D, we would agree to have the parking lot finished prior to CO. It's not an issue. Going to page 12, letter E, we provided landscaping around the facility and within the facility with trees and shrubs. So we believe we meet that criteria. Letter F, we provided fire striping lanes with regards to our meeting with the fire department. So we believe we meet that criteria, and we don't need any input from Green Acres. So we don't touch the Green Acres properties within the facility. So we believe we meet that criteria as well. I've testified to letter G on page 12. On 13, H, I, and J are all acceptable comments. On page 14, K is an acceptable comment. I provided testimony on L and briefly touched on M regarding the LOI that was issued for the site, as well as trying to minimize as much of wooden buffer disturbance as possible. But we did request that variance in our notice, should the board.
Do we have the latest LOI? I don't know if I'm coming through. Do we have the latest LOI, Fred?
I don't believe we submitted it, Stan, because it's old enough where I don't think it would be relevant. But I can attest that we walked the site, did not see anything that would stand out as wetlands. The DEP did ask as part of our application to provide a new LOI for the facility or for the property. So we would agree to provide any new LOIs that were issued for, and they would be, again, absences for the property.
Correct. Okay.
The next comment, which is on page 14, is N. It rolls over onto page 15. That has, it says it's been addressed in an acceptable manner, so I think we're okay there. But we would agree to replace any plants if they died or did not survive. With regards to design waivers, we touched on the preservation of the landscape, and again, if we needed to provide any additional testimony, we can provide that, but I hit that earlier. I showed the picture for 2B on how it relates to the neighboring walkways. So we provided testimony on that. I did mention also this is a site that's regulated by an LSRP, and when we develop the property, the landscaping will be a cap in accordance with the DEP criteria and the LSRP's criteria, as well as the pavement building will be also a cap. So this development will act as a cap for the facility. On page 15, letter C, that wraps around to page 16. This is regards to the fire lanes along Howard Street. Again, we did show a cross section of the apparatus be able to reach the frontage of the facility. The fire department did not have any further comments on this, so we felt we addressed the item. Letter D, this is regards to stormwater surface discharge. And again, we do have compliant stormwater requirements. We do need a DEP permit as well as a city approval for stormwater, so we would address that at that time. For letter E on the waiver side on page 17, we have proposed a water main extension. We do have the will serve letters, and we don't need approval from JCP&L any further because the lines will stay in place. I addressed F with regards to advertisements. We'll have further details on the signage at that time, but at this point, we don't have anything further. It's generic signage approval. With regards to G, there are no exposed storage tanks or machinery installations or service areas on this facility. It's a warehousing facility, so everything would happen inside the facility, which would be storage of goods at this location. Flipping over to page 18, the design standards, those are all outlined on our site plan sheet or overall site plan sheet. And we are compliant 100% with the civil site standards. The architect will touch on the architectural site standards with this requirement. Again, I believe that's not applicable because we're not proposing the Howard Street extension. Same with letter J on page 18, and letter K was considered complete. Moving on to page 19, the first three comments, which are listed L, B, and C. I think there's just a weird situation that happened there, are just all acknowledgements. They're addressed. I provided testimony on D, and then E is just an acknowledgement as well. Flipping over to page 20, there was a request to provide trench drains. Mr. Schreck and I talked about this previously, that we didn't feel we needed trench drains at the western driveway or the eastern driveway. We would provide inlets and grading instead, but we'd be happy to provide the trench drains if the board sees fit. We are asking for a waiver for landscaping every fifth row. We felt it was necessary to keep the landscape on the border of the parking spaces. So we did propose heavy landscaping and bioretention basins at those locations to provide screening and not provide the landscaping area. And then we did provide H, again, testimony. We do have landscaping and buffers, and we've agreed to provide additional trees along the Howard Street frontage as well. And then on I, we do have pedestrian sidewalks that do provide access from the car parking spaces into the facility. And then finally on J, we do have the fire lanes on the site, and we do have the cross section showing how the fire truck does access the property. So again, the fire requirement for the facility. Letter K, we do have the appropriate fire widths as requested by the fire official. So along the fire lanes, they are all 30 feet, and that's compliant. With regards to L, the only thing we don't have as of right now is the flow test for the facility, because it was wintertime, we couldn't test it. So we'll provide that, but we do have hydrants within 600 feet, so no problem there. With regards to M, we will comply with the soil erosion and grading criteria for the town, as well as soil erosion criteria for the county. And then for N, we agree to this requirement as well. And then finally on page 22, O is we'll agree to that as well, and we'll add a note to the plans. With regards to the technical comments, well, I'll suggest I do with the board is I'll skip to the ones that I want to just go for discussion on, if that's okay with the board, so we can.
I think you should do that. Yeah, just everything's gonna be presumed accepted, except the ones you identify.
Yeah, okay. So on page 23, CI, Mr. Schreck's asking for an environmental assessment of the facility. That will be done as part of our DEP application. So we would agree to provide the DEP permit once it's approved, but we don't feel assessment is necessary at this time, but all the other approvals we would provide. So that's not an issue there. I touched on CIII.
It's understood that we're in for preliminary approval, so that would be conditional.
Okay, no problem. All right, so going to page 24, it's the second comment above D, which is VIII. We don't need Green Acres approval. I think I addressed that already. I'll adjust the lines accordingly to make sure that we show that graphically on our plans. So that's fine. DI, which is the next, second to last on this page, there was a request to provide a turnaround area at the end of Howard Street. Our driveway is basically within one property line of the end of the street, so the drivers would see that end of the street. So we don't propose to provide a turnaround area. We simply feel that the drivers would stop and back up, 50 feet and then turn to the facility. Generally, warehouse trucks know where they're going when they get used to it from a perspective of this area. Once they see the driveway signage on the eastern side and the building itself, they should know that this is the facility they're going to, because there's nothing else further beyond to the west on the site, with the exception of the pistol range.
I'd like to keep that as an open discussion, because we put that comment in based on experience we've had with bridge development, and an assumption that trucks know where they're going is not quite correct. And if we did have one go a rant at Mr. Drive, other areas of town, and backing a truck up on a Howard Street's probably not a good idea. So I like to leave that open for discussion through the board.
I concur.
All right, so skipping ahead to page 26, it's a second comment above E, so it's XV. It's a Howard Street discussion, and we mentioned that previously. So again, that we're not addressing that during this hearing unless we have discussion further. On page 27, VI, again, it's a trench drain item. I mentioned that previously, just a note for the board. On the page 28, the first comment on top, it's IX. Again, it's a discussion about Howard Street, so we've kind of hit that already. And then I think, I'm sorry for taking some time with the board. I just want to make sure I got all these right. I think that's essentially it for the civil items up through page. Traffic starts on page 39 under section E3, and architecture's after that. So I think that's pretty much it from a civil perspective with the review letter.
Great,
Stan,
thank
you
you, Mr. Bowler. Does that
Concur with
conclude
that, Stan?
your
Excuse me.
testimony?
Does that sound good, Stan?
Fine, we can have Brad available. Yeah, I'm fine. And nice job, Brad. It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Peck.
Yeah, and I was just asking, confirming that Mr. Bowler had concluded his testimony, and we can have further board comments and then, public questions of Mr. Bowler.
We're going to
Yes,
hold
sir.
off on public questions to Mr. Bowler. Again, I think other witnesses
until
might be
the-
able to address some of the.
Until the end.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Any board questions? Okay, well, if we're done with Mr. Bowler, I'd like to call our next witness, which is our architect, Mr. Oliver Franklin.
Mr. Franklin, there you are. Mr. Franklin, can you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll give in this matter before the land use board will be the truth and nothing but the truth to the best of your ability, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And just for the record, we have Mr. Franklin's CV. And give me 1 second here, Ms. Leffler. That'll be marked A2.
Okay.
Thank you. And I would recommend the board accept him as an architectural expert.
So moved.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Franklin,
Yes,
you're familiar with the project?
yes, I am.
And did you prepare the architectural plans
Some
for the
of them-
project?
Some and directed others.
Okay, great. Would you show the board what you've prepared?
Okay. We're gonna have 4 exhibits. The first one is the floor plan.
So that would be A11.
Yes.
Which is dated 6/8/21. What we have here is a single-story industrial building of.
Are you able to share your screen?
Oh, yes, that would help, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Is that
There you
viewable?
go. Yes, so this is A11.
Yes, it is. So we have a single-story industrial building of 420 square feet to be construction. The skin is a precast panel supported by a steel substructure. The building is actually 1,400 square feet in length and 300 feet in width. The building is configured as an elongated rectangle with the long elevations facing north to Howard Street and south to the river. The shorter east and west elevations house the main entries, which have direct access to the parking. We located these proposed office spaces in the corner with the access off of the parking because it wasn't viable to create an entry off of Howard Street. Presently, at this northeast corner, our slab, which is at 218 feet, is actually 4 feet lower than Howard Street. As you move to the west side of the building, we're approximately 15 feet below Howard Street. So it made it difficult to create entries off of Howard Street because we'll start creating cave-like areas. The south elevation, we've got loading dock, truck bays, and this will be screened by landscaping and walls that were noted in the civil's presentation. Moving on to the second exhibit.
This is going to be 12. Can we just get an identification, what we can call this, please?
This is A2, sheet A2.
Right, but
What does sheet A2 depict?
It depicts the north and the west elevations.
Okay.
So you notice the west and east ends of this north elevation. We have a raised parapet, intermittent banding, and maroon infills that are designating the office areas. So this happens both on the east edge of the building and on the west edge of the building. These raised parapet elements that are dark gray with maroon banding in between are approximately every 200 linear feet. We have a light gray band with a strip panel in the middle with reveals. In essence, we were trying the dark, the gray color elements, and also with the higher roof parapet elements, trying to break up this facade because it's 1,400 square feet. We feel that the proportions we've established help to relate to the buildings across Howard Street. As I had mentioned before, if we're on this east elevation, we are approximately, Howard Street is approximately 5 foot up. So that will be midway between these windows. And as we move to the west of the building, Howard Street will be approximately 15 feet. So that would mean that we're showing on the east end approximately 44 feet of our structure, and on the west end, 34 feet. So even though this building has a height of 49 feet from the slab, we feel that the grade helps reduce that height along with our design elements. We've also incorporated clear story windows every 50 feet. That will bring natural light into the building, and it will also help break up the facade. Since this is a flat facade, we try to raise the parapet heights and create an undulation with the different colors. The east and west elevations, we have highlighted the corners. So these are the proposed office locations.
And this is A13?
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you just scrolled down A12, I'm sorry.
This is, so this, the west elevation, these corners are main entries. So if I can move up and go back and forth, if I can move to the next plate, which would be A3. And it will have the
A13.
south elevation and the east elevation. So that will be the next exhibit. So you notice both our east elevation and moving back to our west elevation. On the corner here, we have our entry to the proposed office spaces, which is a storefront with double doors. We propose that the interior offices will be flanked in this facade, and it is highlighted by the maroon color on each side. We continue to try to break up this facade by stepping it down till it gets to the south facade, where we have our loading docks. So the south facade, we continue to try to break up the large elongated building, again with color and a horizontal band which ties the loading dock doors together. We are proposing a flat roof, white, with a slope of a 1/4 inch, which will only be utilized for mechanical equipment, and the only access will be for service and emergencies. We're not designing this building to meet any particular green building certification, but we will incorporate to the best of our abilities many green building design elements such as low VOC materials, water conservation fixtures, and mold prevention components. The building will also be designed to the Jersey State Energy Code. That'll include low E windows, a white roof, and exterior wall insulation. Right now, we do not know which tenants will be in the structure, so therefore we'll design it for the noise and odor for a typical industrial building, and we'll adjust that if the future tenants' design requirements will be different. The building will incorporate the numbering and man door numbering systems as required by the police and fire department. The building will have a sprinkler system designed per NFPA 13 guidelines throughout the proposed structure. The detail of that classification and system will be determined further in the design process. The building's highest point, which would be on the northeast and the northwest corner, is 49 feet. We're below the 50-foot requirement. The average grade will be even further down, so we have no issues. We meet the code requirement there. As we move on to the exhibit number 4. This is
garnet and gray.
I'm sorry.
The colors, they look garnet and gray.
Yeah, maroon, light gray, dark gray.
And this is sheet A4?
This is this is a rendering exhibit, 22 November 2021. So we call it the eye level rendering view. So you'll notice at the corner here, we proposed the office in the corner facing the parking lot because of the practicality of actually having it on this long north elevation. You can see on the elongated elevation, we go with the dark gray room, light gray, and we continue that down the facade. Understanding that this precast panel building is somewhat flat, so we try to accentuate it with the different colors. We have storefront entry, double doors. And that's the architectural presentation.
Thank you
Is
very
there
much,
questions?
Mr. Franklin.
Welcome.
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Franklin?
Apparently not.
Hearing none, I'd like to then call our next witness, which would be John Witchner, our traffic engineer.
Hello, Mark.
Hey, John.
Mr. Witchner, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this matter before the land use board will be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but truth, to the best of your ability, so help you God?
I do.
And Ms. Leffler and board, we have Mr. Witchner's CV, which we have previously marked as, or we're going to be marking as A4, and I've reviewed it and recommend the board accept him as a traffic engineer.
So deemed.
Great. John, you're familiar with this project? You've reviewed the site plans?
Yes, I have.
And you've listened to the testimony that's been given so far in the course of this hearing?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and you conducted a traffic analysis of the project?
Correct.
Okay, can you lead the board through your traffic analysis?
Absolutely. So our office prepared two documents. The first document was a trip generation comparison letter. That letter was dated July of 2021 and was part of the initial submission of this application. That trip generation comparison letter merely was to compare the previously approved residential development, I believe back in 2014, which had a mix of apartments and townhomes, to the proposed development. The previously approved development, according to the Institute of Transportation Engineers, was anticipated to generate about 2,800 trips per day. We then took a look at what the ITE, or Institute of Transportation Engineers, would anticipate to be generated by the proposed development, 420,000 square foot industrial building. And the ITE suggests that this building would generate approximately 700 trips per day. It's about a 75% decrease in traffic. At that point, that information certainly doesn't satisfy the traffic impact study requirements for the application. So then we went further with the preparation of a traffic impact study. And really every traffic impact study starts with existing conditions, which amounts to existing traffic volumes within the study area. We focused on the South Main Street corridor, and specifically the intersections of South Main Street and McKean, South Main Street and Center, which is the next signalized intersection to the east, and South Main and Stockton, which is the next intersection to the west. We typically, and as part of this traffic study, we analyze the intersections to give them letter grades, A through F, much like grades in school, A being the best, F being the worst. We then move toward a future analysis. And what the future analysis allows us to do is to make an apples to apples comparison, future traffic conditions without the site versus future traffic conditions with the site. We apply the typical population growth and traffic growth, background growth factors to existing conditions to determine future traffic conditions without the site. We then generate trips, and as I mentioned, using ITE before, we generate trips for this particular site using the square footage of the building as the independent variable for a warehouse use or industrial use. We apply those trips and distribute those trips to the study roadway network, and it allows us to understand future development traffic volumes with the development. Then able to compare the without development versus with development comparison, we were able to determine that the levels of service or the grades of the intersections within the study area all operate at acceptable levels of service, level service C or better for the intersections in the study area in the future with development conditions. Subsequent to that analysis, the applicant, and it was referred to many times here this evening, the applicant was able to secure property at the southeast corner of the intersection of South Main and McKean Street. And I'm going to share my screen. It gives an aerial, and this has been, I believe, shared here earlier this evening. So as we've talked about and Mr. Bowler has testified to before, the red area is the subject property. The intersection of South Main Street and McKean operates from an efficiency standpoint at level service C or better. However, as was mentioned before, there are some geometric constraints on the southeast corner. The applicant was able to secure that property, and one of the advantages of securing that property in the southeast corner is to allow for an increased radius on the southeast corner to facilitate right turn movements for any vehicle exiting the site, but particularly trucks exiting the site. It was discussed before about traffic heading west on Main Street, east on Main Street. What we've seen in existing conditions of existing industrial uses, both in the north side of Main Street and the south side of Main Street, approximately 70% of trucks related to industrial uses desire to head to and from the east on Main Street, basically back and forth to 22 and I-78 there, approximately 3 miles away. The applicant also mentioned this evening that they were willing to accept a condition to restrict left turn movements from McKean Street onto South Main Street, and thereby forcing or requiring all of their traffic to perform this right turn movement. And with the improvements that the applicant is now able to perform at the signalized intersection of South Main Street and McKean, that intersection will continue to operate at acceptable levels of service. In addition, we also looked at the site driveways, internal circulation, and Howard Street as really the traffic along Howard Street really has traffic solely related to the commercial industrial uses in the I-1 zone on the north side of Howard Street. Much less traffic on the Howard Street corridor than the South Main Street corridor. Both driveways operate at acceptable levels of service, have adequate sight distance, and have adequate design for the vehicle types that are anticipated to access the property. And just to kind of reiterate some of the testimony that Mr. Bowler had, there is a request for a waiver for the width of the driveways on Howard Street, and that is really to accommodate those truck turning maneuvers. And so really a balancing act between what the ordinance requires versus the operational aspects of an industrial use. I do want to hit on some comments in Mr. Schreck's review letter, specifically started on page 39. But maybe before I do that, Mr. Peck, I don't know if you wanted me to give the board an opportunity to ask any questions on the results of the traffic impact study.
Sure. I think that would be appropriate.
Any comments from the board?
So I have a question. Sorry, you're really talking about the exiting of vehicles, say through McKean Street on the South Main, but vehicles entering would come from South Main onto McKean also, correct?
That is correct. Certainly for every exiting vehicle, they must have entered the site. So the operations of entering vehicles and the geometry for entering vehicles is adequate, certainly at the intersection of McKean Street and South Main. There were no geometric improvements necessary to facilitate those movements. And those movements do operate under acceptable levels of service.
And when you get to the end of McKean and try to make a right onto Howard, that intersection's wide enough for trucks to make that turn?
It is, and in addition, the driveway that aligns with the intersection of Howard Street and McKean Street, and if I may, I'm going to share the previous exhibit that Mr. Bowler had shared on the left part. I'm sorry, on the right part of the screen. It also allows for trucks to enter as a straight or a through movement into the site from McKean as well.
Okay.
What about the stacking of trucks?
In any particular location?
McKean Street is what you're talking about. So now you're gonna have to stack trucks coming in or stack trucks going out.
All right. So based upon the statistics outlined in the Institute of Transportation Engineers, a building of this size generates approximately 8 truck trips per hour in the morning peak hour and 13 truck trips in the afternoon peak hour. We identify morning peak hour of the heaviest hour between 7 and 9 a.m. and the afternoon peak hour is the heaviest hour between 4 to 6 p.m. The signal timings, I guess if we're heading up to for exiting traffic at McKean and South Main, the signal timing and the intersection at that location can accommodate vehicles. Those trucks exiting, those 4 trucks enter and 4 trucks exit over the course of that hour. The signal timings allow those queues to enter onto South Main Street acceptably, and really it's a truck every 15 minutes. In the afternoon peak hour, it's a total of 13 truck trips. Based upon the statistics for a building this size, we're not talking about these million and a half building size square foot buildings that are in the close proximity. We're looking at 7 entering trucks and 6 exiting trucks. So really, those 7 entering trucks over the course of an hour is one every 8 to 9 minutes or so, and those signal timings can accommodate the entering and exiting trucks there. And in terms of any stacking on public roadway, the goal obviously is to along Howard Street, to get them into the driveways and then toward the back loading docks in the rear of the building. So we don't anticipate any queuing or any stacking on the public roadway.
Well, you still got trucks coming out of Warren Pipe, and then the stacking I'm talking about is from Mercer Street to Howard. So you got the trestle right there. You can't stack a truck underneath the trestle. So you're looking at maybe 1 truck at Mercer Street, and then now you're coming back into Mercer Street or McKean Street back to Howard Street from the abandoned trestle or where the junkyard was. So you're looking at maybe 3-4 trucks there. So depending on how they get through Mercer Street, that's a stop sign, and then the stop light. And if there's any trucks coming from the pipe, there could be a trouble. It definitely could be a stacking problem.
And in our existing counts, we not only count the number of vehicles, but the vehicle types. So the the industrial and commercial uses in the I-1 district on the north side of Howard Street. Those were part of our traffic study, progressing along the McKean Street corridor. I think some of what's seen out there today actually is more related to parking issues along Howard Street by other users in the area. But again, for a building this size, the number of studies of existing buildings that ITE has done over the last couple of decades, upwards of 4 dozen studies, 3 to 4 dozen studies across the country. We are looking at approximately 8 truck trips in the morning and 13 truck trips in the afternoon. And certainly it's going to spread pretty equally throughout the course of the day.
Anyone else on the board?
I have a question.
Chairman, if I may, John, do you anticipate any?
Sure, go ahead, Stan.
Okay, Chairman, I didn't know if you can hear me or not. Yeah, John, do you anticipate any parking limitations being required on McKean Street? I'm looking at your exhibit sheet number 3 as submitted. You did the layover at the existing aerial. It does show some parking that may be interfered with. Are you going to have two-way truck traffic? Do you anticipate having to require parking limitations on McKean Street?
So,
Can we get two-way truck traffic?
Yeah, so Stan, I brought up on the screen sheet 3. Is this the exhibit that you were referencing?
Yeah, correct. But you
Okay.
can see where you placed your vehicle. You're interfering with the existing parking that's there now. Anticipate there is parking further up on McKean Street. That'd be an issue with two-way truck traffic and parking for the residential buildings.
Going into final design, one of the things that we would take a look at is a potential parking restriction on the section of McKean Street from Cedar Alley toward South Main Street, specifically, certainly for the dedicated right turn lane along where my cursor is. What we want to do is provide a dedicated right turn lane for those vehicles making a right, passenger vehicles or trucks, making a right onto South Main Street. And I would anticipate parking restriction in that area. Anything south of Cedar Alley, I do not anticipate parking restrictions along McKean. But I think when we get into final design, we do want to take a look at specifically the section of McKean between Cedar Alley and South Main Street.
And John, there's a possibility too with those 2 lots, when the buildings are raised, that additional parking could be added on those lots as well, correct?
That is correct. I personally have not looked at the opportunity for a pocket parking lot in that area. So
but it's something that could work.
Yes, I think that should be that could be looked at in terms of the final design, because there is certainly more property being acquired than is necessary for the actual geometric improvement. So there could be some residual property utilized for a replacement of that parking.
Thank you.
The structure, if I may continue, is the operations anticipated to be 24/7? We'll be having truck circulation through a residential neighborhood in all hours of the day?
The hours of operation tend to be tenant specific. A tenant has not been identified as of yet. One of the things that we've seen from a traffic impact study perspective, we analyze the peak hours, which tend to happen, again, between 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. Other times of the day, there's certainly less traffic on the adjacent roadway network. I can't speak to the hours of operation of an unidentified tenant as of this point, but during those off-peak hours, from a roadway sufficiency perspective, the operations do work.
think that the comment was more addressed to the impact on the residential neighborhood with truck traffic all hours of the day. Understood.
I think the testimony was that tenant hasn't been identified, so we don't know that there's going to be truck traffic at all hours of the day. And
Exactly, that's the point exactly. You don't know.
Kelly, we're gonna mark this as Exhibit A15.
Also, the radius of that intersection that's shown is going to eliminate parking on South Main Street, so that may have to be incorporated into that parking lot also if we're anticipating another parking lot.
To Stan's point, I zoomed in here on the exhibit. Yeah, so there is I'll call it probably a 30-foot stretch of South Main Street that opens up with this radius improvement, and agreed that would be, I'll call it 2 cars, maybe a little less than 2 cars, but for the path of the actual vehicle, probably 2 on-street parking spaces that we would look to replace with this, with the residual property that's being purchased in the dark gray area.
And I'll note again that the applicant's happy to work with the town to replace any parking that's lost on McKean or South Main, on these South Main properties that would be used for the turning lane. Happy to work with the town.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. When it comes to sound, is there requirements that you have to stay at certain decibels in a residential area? And do we have an ordinance to limit that?
I personally have not reviewed the ordinance as it relates to sound. And maybe that's something I can look into. I know that there are other, trucks in the vicinity operating, over in overnight hours. I'm not sure of the decibel level of vehicle requirements for the
And
ordinance.
we'll stipulate that we will comply with the municipal and state noise codes.
There are performance standards with requirements to noise and air quality, et cetera. It's more applicable to the use of the site. To extrapolate that to the traffic impact is it's an interesting thought, and we should be looking at that. I agree. Good comment.
Mr. Austin, Mr. Trembler, did you have any comments?
I have another question. Clearly, because it's Stockton Street and South Main, trucks cannot make a left-hand turn off of South Main onto Stockton and vice versa, Stockton to South Main. How do we prevent that? Because for a fact there will be trucks that miss this entrance on McKean Street and will try to make that left-hand turn from South Main to Stockton. And that is a very tight intersection. How do we prevent trucks from making a left from South Main onto Stockton and vice versa?
Good. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I would just add that, to reiterate prior comment, we're happy to work with the town on signage and, to do what we can to make that possibility as least likely as possible to occur, again, through the installation of clear and visible signage on that corridor.
Okay.
Tony?
One thing that I'm concerned about, and I know that it's really hard to tell trucks where to go. They end up in our neighborhood all the time. When they exit off of Route 22 on the going eastbound, and they exit down to North Main Street. Now, I know a lot of them park down at the parking lot that's adjacent to the Free Bridge. And hopefully the redevelopment goes through and they're no longer down there. How can we keep them from going down South Main Street, which is a lot of the folks in our town are concerned about? their businesses, their restaurants, and how can we, is there a way we can keep them from making that turn, making that exit with signage, with, you know, that's what I'm hearing a lot of people, and I'm concerned about that. It's in my neighborhood. They're getting stuck in my neighborhood and they're ripping up lawns, and so that's a concern that I have. Is there a way?
John, should traffic be really approaching this site from that area by the Free Bridge? Or won't most of our traffic be coming and going from Route 22 and 78?
Right.
And then
We're seeing existing industrial uses both on the north side and south side of South Main Street. About 70% are going to from the east to 22 and 78. And you know what I think we've heard the applicants say earlier this evening is that we'll do everything we can do to restrict trucks to certain movements or certain roadways and go as high as 100% to and from the east. And as Mr. Peck had mentioned just a couple minutes ago, you know, we'll be able to, or we're willing to work with the town on restrictions where we can. I can't solve, you know, some of the existing you know, truck issues that are happening up by you know, to the west here that may be displaced by that redevelopment. But where we can work with the borough, you know, we're looking to put in those restrictions. And really what we want to do with the improvement that's up here on the screen, we want to encourage the easiest possible route to and from the east. And I think that the increased radius here in the southeast corner at the applicant's expense really does that to encourage an easier right turn to go back and forth to 22.
And can I also suggest a condition that the applicant will have to include in any leases with any tenants that there can be no left turns onto South Main Street out of the facility?
I'm not sure if that was directed to me, Mark, but
no, I was actually more to the board, suggesting that that's a condition that they could impose, along with requiring the applicant to work with the town on signage and other roadway improvements.
Mr. Peck, on that issue, I obviously haven't thought it through because you just raised it, but that would be a contract between the landlord and the tenant that the town is not a party to. And so if there are violations of that agreement, the only remedy is for the landlord. What remedy does the town have?
Can't the town have Title 39 jurisdiction?
Well, sure they do, but that's something that the town council would have to decide. That's nothing the planning board can do. But I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know how a contractual agreement.
Well, but if it's a condition of approval, that, I mean, it's not unusual for land use boards to require various deed restrictions or things of that nature, which need to be submitted, you know, for the review and approval of the board's professionals. I'm not suggesting that, you know, our whole contract needs to be submitted to the board or should be submitted to the board, but certainly, you know, if we can show to the board's satisfaction, hey, we're going to insert this clause in the lease, and if it's not, you know, that would be a violation of the approval, and I think the town would have sufficient remedies in that regard.
Okay, we can discuss it further.
Yeah, we can figure out how to best approach that, but that's my initial thought.
I have one other question. During your traffic study, did you look and see if there were any school bus stops on that route? And did you contact, say, the school board or the town of Phillipsburg school to see if there were any impacts on this drop off of kids during school hours?
I did not personally contact the school district in terms of location of bus stops. You know, as part of our inventory, we do take a look at stop signs. We do take a look at the context of the roadway, the width of the roadway, things like that. All vehicles absolutely need to abide by, the state laws of, stopping for school buses. There are some existing trucks on these roadways today. We talked about, adding, 8 truck trips for entering, for exiting in the morning. And then really the peak of the trucks are a little bit after school, school hours. We focused on geometry, width, and efficiency of the intersections.
But John, we can take a look at school bus locations, bus stop locations and stuff, and present that in the course of any final site plan approval application, correct?
Yes, we can provide that information to Stan's office.
Thank you.
If I may, there were a couple traffic related comments in Stan's review letter. As mentioned before, I believe they started on page 39. Comment 3A discusses our original submission of a comparison between the previously approved residential development and the currently proposed industrial development. So that was part of our initial submission. Subsequent to that submission, we then did follow up with a full traffic impact study that was completed, that I had testified to earlier here this evening. The comment 3B discusses again the traffic impact study, and as I mentioned before, all the intersections in the study areas operate at acceptable levels of service, level service B or better, in fact. And then beyond the operational and capacity aspects of the traffic study, we had identified this geometric deficiency, which the applicant was then able to pursue and acquire the properties in dark gray up here on the screen for a geometric improvement. That was kind of performed after the initial traffic impact study, but was identified as a geometric constraint there. Comment number 3C and 3D, I'll kind of take together. It really focuses on identification of a tenant. Obviously, as we discussed here this evening, a tenant has not been identified, but one of the things that we've seen municipalities and reviewing jurisdictions impose, understandably, is a post-development traffic count to confirm the findings of the traffic impact study. As I mentioned before, the ITE utilized 3 to 4 dozen existing sites as data points to develop their statistics for anticipated trip generation on a per 1,000 square foot basis. So using square footage as independent variable. I believe that any kind of identified tenant would fall within that range of data of the 3 to 4 dozen data points that ITE uses. But we have seen municipalities and reviewing agencies require post-development traffic count to confirm the results of the traffic study. And that irons out the traffic related comments in Stan's letter on pages 39 and into page 40.
All right, just a comment that's more for information. The town is initiating the truck route study through the town, which would have to gain approval from NJDOT. It's a process. It's certainly not, this application is not a precursor to it, but we have had issues with trucks on South Main Street. And if this truck route designation is finally approved, it would eliminate any truck traffic heading down toward Union Square to the north of McKean Street with significant signage and enforcement opportunity from the police. So the town's been trying to address traffic on South Main Street. I think that that would eliminate any of the traffic going down to Stockton.
Yeah, and again, that sounds great. Because we're all in favor of restricting the left-hand turns on South Main Street.
Any other board members?
Mr. Zwicker and Mr. Peck, I'm going to make a suggestion right now. Mark, I believe you have one more witness. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So given that it's 9:40, this is going to be my suggestion that we hear this witness, which will take us to 10 o'clock, and that we then carry this application to the January 27 meeting, which is the next regularly scheduled meeting, which is only 3 weeks away, to allow the applicant to regroup and decide if they want to offer additional testimony or witnesses, and to allow their professionals to work with Mr. Schreck, because there's been a lot of good comments here. And then we have the, again, allow the applicant to produce whatever they want on the 27th additionally, and then we have public comment. I'm concerned that we won't be giving everybody a fair shake, the applicant and the public, if we try to rush through this. It will also allow me and Mr. Peck to discuss some issues that have come up. And finally, it'll allow me and Mr. Peck to discuss exactly what they're looking for, because I'll be responsible for making a resolution at the end of the meeting, and that we would adopt at the next meeting. So I think it would be appropriate to allow everybody an opportunity to regroup and proceed after this last witness in only 3 weeks. As far as I remember, Ms. Leffler can tell me if I'm incorrect, we don't have anything that's ready for the 27th in terms of any other applications. So I think this would be the only hearing that would continue. Nothing else seems to be ready. So if that makes sense to Mr. Zwicker and Mr. Peck, I'd suggest we just do this last witness and then carry.
If you're good with that, Mark, I am, because I think everybody
And
has. a
Scott,
right
these
to-
witnesses would have to return.
I'm sorry, what?
He's saying that the witnesses
You
will
have to
have to
have
come
all
back.
these witnesses back, so you should check.
Right, we would need the witness.
You should have to, you
Well,
should check
we-
for conflicts on those things.
We do have an issue with Mr. Bowler's availability on the 27th. Is it possible to get a special meeting? Perhaps in 2 weeks?
Well, I think there's a lot that needs to be covered. I don't want to rush anything. Mr. Bo is not available at all on the 27th. Again, it's a regularly scheduled meeting with nothing on the agenda.
Scott, it's
Yeah.
Kelly. We do have the one thing on Mars Street. I think that's going to be a hearing for that. We also have on the 27th for the 150 Fleming Drive. We also have that. That was published.
Okay. I don't know if more.
Scott, you can't get things done in 2 weeks? We have a special meeting?
Well,
Because
I'm just suggesting that that'll give the applicant more time to regroup. And I think the applicant's professionals and Mr. Schreck are going to need to have further discussions based upon what we've heard tonight. I can come back in 2 weeks, but I want to give everybody adequate opportunity.
Mark, what do you think
Yeah.
about 2 weeks?
And you're going to have to poll the board members here too to see what their availability is. Let's look at the calendar.
Yeah, because everybody needs a right to speak here. There's too many people been hanging in here all night. You're right there. We could go to 12, 1 o'clock if we let everybody speak.
Yeah. So 2 weeks is January 20th. If the board and the applicant think they can be available.
I can also state we could have somebody else from Mr. Bowler's office available on the 27th, but Mr. Bowler's been the one who's given the testimony, so.
Yeah, I understand.
So we can have somebody else show up. It's just, I think that'd be awkward.
So what about, what about Monday, January 24th? That's 2.5 weeks.
Well, the 20th would work for us. The 24th works
I have
also.
a conflict.
Stan, what do
Stan,
you have?
I have a conflict.
I have a conflict as well.
On the 20th?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I have
how,
a conflict on the 20th and
how's Monday, the
24th.
24th looking?
I have a
Any board-
conflict.
24th, I believe works for everybody.
Stan, what did you say about the 24th?
I have a conflict.
How about the 25th?
I have a conflict. No, negative. That opened up for me. 25th, I'm okay.
Mark, Monday the 25th, or excuse me, Tuesday the 25th?
I'm frantically polling my team via text. This is one of the many drawbacks in addition to being Zoom bombed. You can't have that quick consultation. I believe we're good, the 25th.
Does any board member have a problem with Tuesday the 25th?
I'm good.
Okay. So let's plan on that. And let's just do this last witness. This will take us beyond the 10 o'clock hour because again, we need everybody to have full opportunity to be heard on both sides. And there's some buttoning up that needs to be done.
Yeah, no, and we really appreciate the board's accommodation of the meeting on the 25th. So we do appreciate that.
Okay.
So, okay, I'd like to call our final witness. And again, we have now Mr. DeBeer hanging in reserve if needed. So if he's going to offer testimony, that would be on the 25th.
Yeah, you can offer any witnesses you want on the 25th. Absolutely.
Exactly. But we're calling our planner right now, John McDonough.
Okay. Mr. McDonough, there's your right hand.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Mr. McDonough, do you swear or affirm that your testimony here will be the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God, to the best of your ability?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And we do have Mr. McDonough's CV, and we have that marked as an exhibit
A3, right?
A3, that's correct. Thank you. Okay.
I'm sorry, is Mr. McDonough sworn?
Yes, he was.
Yes.
Okay, and is he accepted as an expert?
Yes, I apologize.
Okay, great.
Yes, he is.
Okay, Mr. McDonough, you've reviewed the plans that are being presented to the board?
In detail, yes, I have.
And you've had an opportunity to review the various Van Cleef review letters with their technical comments about the variances?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and are you prepared to offer testimony as to the proofs for the various variances we're seeking?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, why don't you take that baton and run with it?
Okay, again, hi, everyone. I think there's a good predicate of testimony for me to make planning conclusions that this application will meet the statutory criteria for the relatively minimal relief that the applicant is seeking here. We are in the Riverfront redevelopment plan, which actually goes back to 2005 in its inception. This is going to be subdistrict 5 is fresh zoning that came in, which reverted this back to industrial use in accordance with the I2 zone. And as I am before you now, we're looking at a project that is in substantial conformance with the requirements and regulations of the RRP, the Riverfront Redevelopment Plan. Relatively minor relief that the applicant is seeking, and again, based on Brad's testimony and the testimony of all the witnesses that have gone before me, I think there's a very good predicate for the relief that the applicant is seeking. Importantly, the list of zone conformance here is very long. The list of relief is very minor. Importantly, we're looking at a project that complies from a use standpoint with what I'm calling fresh zoning here. The lot size, this is I'll call it a supersized lot, 31 acres in a 20-acre zone. So it's got excellent capacity, excellent carrying capacity to accommodate the scale of the development that's before you. The setbacks are going to comply on all sides. So the building positioning conforms to the vision of the redevelopment plan. The building mass also conforms to the overall vision of the redevelopment plan. The height, the coverage, all are fully compliant as well. The parking, the applicant's asking for relief, but certainly meets acceptable industry standards. You have extensive testimony now from all of the witnesses that have gone before me, especially Mr. Wishner, that this will meet acceptable industry standards from a parking standpoint, which is perhaps I'll say the biggest ask that the applicant is asking for in terms of the relief, but certainly well above the ITE industry standard of 0.39 per 1,000. This is going to provide a parking supply that's double that ITE standard. So again, certainly reasonable and appropriate from a planning standpoint. With respect to the relief that the applicant is seeking, we always look at the integration with the site. We look at the integration with the neighborhood as well. And what I'd like to do is just share my screen here to show how nicely this building and this development is going to marry up with the landform that's before you. Mr. Chair, Mark, I don't know if we need to identify this for the record, if it's been previously entered for the board.
I don't think it has. I think that would be A16.
I would
Okay.
concur.
So, Mr. Wilhelm, for the for marking, A16 is going to be 3 exhibits. They're just drone shots that we took back in October. So they are, I'd say, a fair and accurate representation of the site, with the exception that, of course, some of the foliage has now come down since then. But the key point here is the subject site is what you see in the middle of the photograph. Again, with Howard Street running, I'll use the river for orientation, and I'll use it north and south, even though we know this may not necessarily be true north at this location. So this would be looking north. You've got Howard Street on the right-hand side. You've got great context here in terms of compatibility, industrial uses. You've got the shooting range. You've got the junkyard as well. You've got industrial uses. Again, excellent compatibility from a land use planning standpoint in terms of the use here. And of course, that's what your redevelopment plan contemplates in terms of an industrial use. And the applicant is delivering a permitted use here that is going to be fully conforming with the mass and scale of what the zone plan contemplates. Importantly here is the way this site is going to nestle into the landform. The site, as we know, drops off from Howard Street and keeps the development away from the residential area, and I'll say from the core of your town, which you see in the right-hand portion. This is going to be a very nice low-profile building that will blend into the landscape and not create a new skyline. It's not going to protrude above the buildings on the other side, and again, step down very nicely with the landform. I think Brad and his team have done an excellent job here of grading and integrating this proposed development into the landscape that we're looking at. And, just spinning you around, this now hovers you over the river, looking again back into the town and showing how we do have this drop off here and this very excellent integration with this development, keeping it buffered and shielded from the rest of the area. I thought there was a good comment from one of the board members about the impact of noise. There is built-in attenuation here with respect to the fact that we are stepping down with respect to the landform, and the walls and the drop-off will actually mitigate and attenuate sound as well. Of course, this development will be subject to the state municipal regulations as well. So that's an added layer of protection in terms of that concern in that regard. And then finally, spinning you around, looking back down to the south, again, you get a sense of the nice landform and the integration and the blend of these non-residential uses along the waterfront there. With that, we'll just sort of hover on the screen looking back north. Again, as I said here, in terms of the vision for the area, substantial conformance in terms of the use and the form of development that's being proposed, relatively minor relief that the applicant is seeking on the sea level. Mr. Schreck has given you a very good list in his report here, and our applicant has addressed that report. Mr. Bowler through his testimony as well. We look at the benefits of the application as a whole and the package that the applicant is delivering here. We balance that against the potential impacts or the detriments that would be associated with the relief that the applicant is seeking. And from a planning standpoint, based on all the testimony on the record, we can certainly conclude that this project is going to promote the general welfare. We know that warehouses and industrial uses promote the public good as a link in the logistics supply chain. Our government now classifies this as critical infrastructure. That's by the Homeland Security, Office of Emergency Services, the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, all consider this critical infrastructure. I think we all know truck drivers, warehouse workers, we're all exempt and are exempt from the stay-at-home orders, just like healthcare workers, to deliver goods to people in a world which we now live in, where people don't necessarily go out to the world, but the world comes to you. And that's exactly what this land use does, and why this land use promotes the general welfare, which is purpose A of the land use law, which is the core purpose of why we have zoning in the first place. I think the board can also move favorably on the positive criteria in the advancement of purpose I. You saw the architectural plan. This is going to be a very high-class building here. Higher class building and architecture attracts a higher class of tenancy as well. That all will add positive value to the community as well. Likewise, the advancement of purpose G to provide for a variety of uses in appropriate locations. We know that our land use patterns follow our transportation patterns. That artery is there. The regional transportation artery is there. This land use will naturally follow. And I think the applicant, as the application has evolved, has put forth a good mitigative measure to lessen or mitigate any traffic-related impacts on your downtown there. So all of that said, I think we can certainly conclude that in terms of the flexible C balancing here, the benefits of the application as a whole would substantially outweigh any detriments. In terms of the negative criteria, we've got good compatibility here with the surrounding neighborhood and those non-residential uses, the scrapyard, the pistol range, and the industrial uses. Based on all the testimony on the record, the site will function safely and efficiently, both in terms of the flow and the circulation through the site. The parking supply will meet the actual demand based on all of the testimony on the record. And then lastly, we always look at the impact not only on the neighborhood, but on the vision that's articulated in the plan. The plan has been altered to allow this as a permitted use. And again, we're looking at substantial conformity here as well. The board has the power to impose reasonable restrictions. The applicant has offered those reasonable restrictions to mitigate the impact. And I think, again, as I sit here now, in terms of the relief that the applicant is seeking, that lower level C variance relief, the balancing test is clearly met. And just to identify and reinforce for the board, these are all primarily design related relief, no loading areas specifically designated, although we do have 88 loading docks on the site. We just don't have delineated loading spaces per se. I think it's inherent to the use that meets the intent. You heard about the parking supply, that this is going to meet the industry standard. Brad talked about the 1 per 1,500. We're at the 1 per 200. I'm sorry, 1,200, which is sort of mid-range between the ordinance of 1 per 1,000, and again, meets acceptable industry standards. The driveway width, the non-residential driveway width being greater than 30 feet at the property line and 40 feet at the curb line, again, is necessary to effectuate the free flow of traffic on this particular site. Landscaping, there's no landscaping associated with the parking area, but that's again, given the nature of the use, and we do have a good edge around this property, good green belt will help it blend with the surrounding landscape. It's inevitable that there will be some removal of naturally wooded areas with any development of this site. And that's really your C level relief that the applicant is seeking, all of which I think is justifiable under that flexible C test. Lastly, there are some design exceptions. They've all been addressed by Brad in his testimony. I'll just tie them back to the statutory criteria that whenever you're dealing with a design exception, we don't even have to look at balancing here. We simply have to look at whether the relief is reasonable and appropriate. Clearly, the design-related relief is all going to meet acceptable industry standards. This application has been well vetted through a 44-page review by Mr. Schreck, who is as thorough as it gets in terms of keeping a watchful eye on this project. And I think This applicant has given good care and consideration to those comments and has responded. All said, the statutory criteria for all of the relief that the applicant is seeking are met here. Our applicant is delivering a very good project, a very good use that is substantially in conformance with what is actually a really good zone plan as well. With that, I will pause and open up for any redirect or cross and finally get this off the screen.
No, I think it's.
And I hit
appropriate for
10:01,
the board
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Went 1 minute over.
Anybody from the board have any comments for Mr. McDonough? First, I'd like to thank you. That was a good picture. It really shows what the area really looks like. And when somebody comments on our engineer giving him a 44-page to-do list and is happy about it, that's our guys, our professionals do a good job. They really do. And the town ought to know that. The community ought to know that. Everybody's here looking after everybody's best interest. So thank you for at least acknowledging that. Yeah.
Indeed.
Any other questions from any of the board?
How about Angela? Any comments from Angela?
Yeah. Good stuff.
No, I think Mr. McDonough covered everything fairly well. I don't have any comments at this time. Thank you.
Okay.
Mark, you want to
Well-
bring it around?
Yeah, well, I guess that concludes Mr. McDonough's testimony for now. So based on the discussion we had a couple minutes ago, I think we're wrapping it up. I would like to confirm and again, greatly appreciate the board's consideration with the January 25th meeting. Want to confirm that the board members who are present and participating tonight will all be available on the 25th. I know that it was kind of chaotic there when we were throwing dates around. So it was
Yes.
that polled?
Yeah,
So I do actually have a scheduled meeting that night. I was trying to find out if I have to attend and I have not heard back yet. So I will have to say I have a conflict that night. I'm sorry.
okay. I think if all the board members are available and the
I
applicants,
think Angela's going to be.
you think Angela what? I'm sorry.
He was
Stan.
saying he thinks that I'm gonna need to be there.
Because if we start opening to public comment.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry, what
We're-
I kind of.
We'll expect public comment. We'll expect to go into public comment that evening. So I think it's important that she's here.
You're Stan, aren't you a PP?
Yes, I am, but I'd rather have another planner here.
Well, what does the 26th look like?
Conflict on that night as well.
Well-
Honestly, it's a tough week.
Well, that returns us back to the
So,
27th, the regularly scheduled meeting. So if the board would accept somebody from Brad's office to come, I mean, Brad's put on, all the site testimony. There may be follow-up questions, but again, Brad is the leader of a team who have all worked collaboratively on the plans.
I'm comfortable with that
I'm
too.
actually comfortable.
Yeah, I
Brad,
concur.
Yeah, we can work on the.
That's fine.
And yeah, Brad put a pretty good
I
job
don't
out
think
there.
the
So,
site
I mean,
civils. I don't think the site civils.
Okay, so the 27th it is. So the next regularly scheduled meeting is January 27th. This will be carried. The applicant will have an opportunity to supplement the record as it sees fit. And that there will be no further notice regarding that. So I think for tonight's purposes, Mr. Zwicker, Mr. Duffy, we're going to conclude this application and carry the public comment to the 27th. The last thing I think you need to do, Mr. Duffy, now that you're back, is because it is a regularly scheduled meeting, you can open it to public comment, but we're not going to accept any public comment on this project. But if there's any other public comment on something else, I think because it's a regularly scheduled meeting, you can offer that up.
Okay. Good. Very good, Keith. Ran a good one. Is there any public comment on, I guess, anything but the Perone application?
We have Jay Harris.
Okay, please state your name and your address. You
Hi,
have to
good evening.
unmute yourself.
Good evening, Mayor Joe Harris. I'm the Community Development Manager for Norwest Cap. It's not a comment on the Perone. Can we get a copy of all of the displays that were shown tonight?
So the board secretary will have all the exhibits and they would be available for inspection at the municipal building. You have to contact Ms. Leffler to make those arrangements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bill, I have a question. The two concerns I had about the bus stops and the noise with the tractor trailers on South Main Street. Is that something Stan will look into and have an answer for next meeting?
John, I think the best way to handle that is that a lot of issues were raised, and I think Mr. Schreck and the applicant's professionals are going to talk about those issues, and Mr. Peck and I will too. And maybe we can address that at the next meeting for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Good.
We have Robin.
Yeah, hi. Good evening. Thank you for taking my conversation. Do I have to introduce myself?
Yes, please, your name and your address.
Robin Coe, 344 South Main Street, property owner and business owner. I just wanted to make a comment. It's a little bit about Perone, but not really. Keith, when you started this meeting about public comment, I just want to say this is in a very heavily rental area. This project, I don't think that it's fair to the public. They pay rent, which pays the taxes in town. You know, if there is a resident that has questions or objections to this project, they should be heard, regardless whether they own the property or not. You know, I just think it's wrong not to include them.
So I didn't say I wasn't going to include that. Let me answer it real quick, Scott.
Sure.
I didn't say that we weren't going to include that. I said because of time limits, we had a 5-minute time limit. I didn't want to get off on a tangent if somebody who doesn't live in town start going with 40, 50 people here. That's all, Robert. Everybody's going to have their say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm just going to reiterate again. I'm going to suggest to Mr. Duffy that he can cut you off. We're not going to have public comment on the Perone application. Even if you think it's only tangential, we're not going to have it. The application is being continued. There's going to be more testimony, more witnesses offered. There's going to be more commentary by the board and the professionals. And then everybody at the next meeting will have adequate time to ask or comment however they see fit. But we are not going to have public comment on Perone tonight. So Mr. Duffy, feel free to cut people off if they start going there.
Thank you. Kelly?
Aaron Coleman.
Good evening, everyone. Aaron Coleman, 3 Fairview Heights, also Platinum Star Services at 210 Prospect Avenue. I was wondering if it's possible that to prevent another incident like that had happened that interrupted the meeting, which was absolutely disgusting, whoever had part of that, and I'm sure it will come out in the future. I'm wondering if there's any type of roll call that can be done with the people that are being allowed into the meeting, if they can state their names as well as their address to prevent that from happening again.
My initial reaction is that you cannot require somebody to identify themselves at a public meeting unless they speak. So just merely being present, I think you're allowed to do that without having to divulge who you are. So I don't think that would be enforceable. And then even if we did, when they start telling us they're John Doe or somebody else, what are we going to do? Ask for their identification? So it's a noble idea, but I don't think it's practical or really legal. So sorry.
All right. Thank you.
Kelly?
Dave Morissette.
David, you're on mute. Okay. No, back on mute. David, you're on mute. Go ahead, David. Am I the only one that can't hear him?
I can't.
Nah, he's not.
Why don't we come back to David?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now, David.
Okay, I switched, okay. So, yeah, real quick, there was a question and the municipal.
David, need your name and
David Morris,
address.
sorry, I did it when I was on mute. David Morissette, 5 Fairview Heights, Phillipsburg, New Jersey. There was a question that was asked, and the municipal noise code is 75 decibels, and tractor trailers are 85 decibels. That Stan Schreck had told me that a while ago in another meeting. And the other question that was asked was, there should be no odors detectable without
No,
an instrument.
we'll get to this next meeting, David.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I just
thank
thought I'd
you.
answer those questions. Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Kelly?
Good evening, Bill Benz, 39 South Main Street. My question was related to how do we ask questions that are going to become a little bit more sophisticated than some of the questions that have come up tonight. So there are some points that were brought up, and I think the attorney was well couched in kind of framing them, and they started quoting codes and things like that. I'm wondering, how do I ask a question about the details that might extend beyond the time limit where I could get a better answer?
So my response to that is, as a member of the public, if you don't feel that you're sophisticated enough to ask a question, you certainly could bring somebody who is sophisticated enough to ask that question. So you could bring your own expert to ask a question if you wanted, but that's really all that you can do.
So, and I'll be more specific then. If there was something I heard about what went on tonight, and I had a question about it that might go on, that might create those kind of conversations, that would just be, so I would just present it and go off in 5 minutes.
Yeah, just ask your question and
yeah.
There isn't like a submission process was the question.
No, there is not.
Got it. Thank you.
Kelly?
Jim Flynn?
Hi, Kelly. Hey,
Hi.
just to get it. How's everybody doing? Hey,
Your name and address, please.
James Flynn, 414 First Street, Phillipsburg, New Jersey.
Thank you.
Just ask a question. So you're gonna continue Perone on 27th. We're gonna have the meeting on the 28th also on the 150 Fleming.
No, the regular meeting is on the 27th, and that, Kelly, did you say that, which ones were on the 27th?
150 Fleming Drive was on there and it was advertised.
Okay,
Yes.
yes, it will
For
be
the
on the 27th.
non-condemnation, yeah.
So that will be on the 27th also?
Yes.
Okay. And I just one other thing. I did submit petitions from a lot of people in the neighborhood about the 150 Fleming project. Kelly, did you privy the land use board and the council to copies of those petitions?
I am not allowed to do that, Jim. It has to be done in public. So
Well, we can't do things. So, Mr. Wilhelm, how do we do this? If we can't have meetings in public, how do
Sure.
I submit my petitions to people in public?
Yes.
We'll put on you, Scott.
Yeah, thank you. So that's true. He can't physically hand it to us. So I think it would be appropriate for you to distribute that
Okay.
to the membership.
Sounds like the plan. I got them right here.
We have to adjust.
Everybody has to give me their names and addresses. I have to make copies and drop them off on their front porch, I guess. Is that how?
We won't make it that hard for you, Jim.
Hey, everybody, I'll be at your house.
No, she'll distribute it to the membership. That's only appropriate.
Okay, that was my only question. I mean, my concern at this point in time is 150. I don't want to take your time up tonight. I know we're running late, and I do have a lot of people concerned in the neighborhood and have petitions from all of them. So, not to hold you up, and have a good evening. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kelly?
James Belsky?
Hi, good evening. Jim Belsky, 1020 Deerhaven Terrace, Stortsville. Just a quick comment about Zoom. There are host controls that can be enforced to kind of restrict people talking and sharing. That can be enabled as part of the meeting. It just has to be moderated during the meeting. So there is an overhead to it, but there are some controls that Zoom does offer to help prevent what happened.
Thank you.
Chairman, that will be addressed before the next meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Mr.
Rob.
Okay. Kelly,
We have Teresa.
Hi, Teresa Chapman, 362 Brainerd's Road, Phillipsburg, New Jersey. I'm sorry, is there a special, I missed all that and I thought
there is not a special meeting. It will be, this has been carried to the next regular meeting, which will be January 27th.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We have Frank McVeigh.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just want to wish Happy New Year.
Excuse me, Frank, your name and address, please.
Thank you very much. Frank McVeigh, 489 Corliss Avenue, Phillipsburg, New Jersey. I wanted to wish everyone a Happy New Year and congratulations to all the appointed members that happened this evening, but most importantly to Kelly Loeffler. I know Kelly firsthand what she has self-taught herself and also fulfilled the requirements moving forward since she took on this endeavor. And I just wanted to wish Mrs. Loeffler all the best in 2022 and thank you for your hard and dedicated work.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you. Well said.
Thank you.
Here, here, Frank.
Anyone else, Kelly?
No, I do not see anybody else.
Okay, I'm going to close this public comment. Does anyone have anything for the good of the board from the board members?
I'd like to
Hearing
thank
none.
everybody who signed in tonight for their patience, put up what they did, and staying with us. Thank you, public.
Well said. Hearing nothing else, do I hear a motion for adjournment?
Motion.
John Tumblr. Second, Keith. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any against? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Have a good evening, folks.